Chapter 284. Yang Sui put down the oxtail in his hand and stood up. Seeing Yang Sui casually throw the oxtail away, the young girl next to him glared at Yang Sui. Then she squatted down and carefully picked up the oxtail and put it into a long wooden box next to her. There was a layer of hay in the wooden box, and the oxtail was just right in it. Yang Sui forced a smile. Is it necessary? It's useless anyway. He briefly introduced them. Xiao Xian knew that the young girl was called Misu, who grew up with Yang Sui. Now she was also one of the witches who followed Yang Sui. She would also participate in the sacrifice. I heard that your Yanjiao tribe went back. Did you come with those people in the central region? Yang Sui asked. Yes. Looking at the two's faces, Xiao Xian asked, what happened on your side? Are you going to be ousted? Yang Sui scratched his head, kind of. After a moment of silence, Yang Sui said, it's okay if I don't want to be a witch. However, what's worse now is that I might be burned to death. Bang! Misu threw away the wooden box in her hand. She didn't care about the oxtail that she had carefully put in the box. She roared with red eyes, I haven't prayed for rain yet. How do you know it won't come down? Everyone knows that. Yang Sui smiled dejectedly, it's just a matter of time before I'm burned to death. If you knew it, why did you lie to us? Just say that you can't pray for rain. Why did you admit it? Misu was so angry that her tears flowed down. She wiped her face and put the oxtail back into the box, put it in Yang Sui's hand, and strode out, regardless of whether the dust on her hands was on her face. As he ran out, he even kicked the half-closed door away. Xiao Xian looked at Misu who ran away after kicking the door, and then looked at Yang Sui who was standing there with a dejected look, and asked, what's going on? What happened? Xiao Xian knew that when Yang Sui was competing for the position of the witch candidate, he observed the time when it might rain, and then he made a coincidence and finally defeated other competitors. Yang Sui's face was worse than crying, I regret it. Recalling the situation at that time, he thought, I'm courting death. He should have told the truth under the pressure of the leader. Seeing Xiao Xian again in such a rare situation, Yang Sui briefly explained the situation to Xiao Xian. When he came back from his travels, he did successfully become a wizard. However, at the end of last year, a new leader took office. The leader supported another competitor at that time. It was unknown how he learned that Yang Sui had cheated at that time. As soon as he took office, he started to make trouble for Yang Sui. In addition, there had not been a single drop of rain since the beginning of the year. The new leader seized the opportunity to ask Yang Sui to pray for rain. Yang Sui said it was difficult. If it had been someone else, it would have been fine. But the new chief wanted to promote his own people, so he openly questioned Yang Sui's ability to pray for rain. He said that it was just a coincidence that he met Yang Sui and did not pray for rain with his real ability. He also deceived everyone and disrespected the ancestors and the totem. Because of this, God punished them and there was no rain this year. If this continued, as the weather became hotter and hotter, the soil would quickly dry up and the crops in the fields would not be able to last much longer. He even used Yang Sui as an excuse to deceive the gods. What? To say that it was the previous leader's idea to admit it? Bah! How dare he slander the late previous leader? Yang Sui, you should be burned to death. He asked me to pray for rain. If I failed, it would mean that I angered the gods and they wanted to burn me to appease the gods. Yang Sui took out the oxtail from the box and swung it casually. He continued, in fact, many people knew that it was an excuse, but there was no other way. The chief said it. Moreover, under his instigation, many people really thought that if I failed to pray for rain, burning me to death would solve the problem. In the past, Yang Sui was able to succeed because the previous leader supported him. The previous leader knew that there was a coincidence in Yang Sui's prayer for rain. But at that time, he needed to stabilize the people in the tribe and an opportunity to expand his reputation. That was why he put pressure on Yang Sui when he was about to explain. How many people support you now? Xiao Xian asked. Since the chief did not dare to burn Yang Sui directly, but still delayed it, he must have some scruples. The chief's supporters are more than half of mine. But after the day after tomorrow, probably no one will support me anymore. Yang Sui smiled bitterly. Pray for rain the day after tomorrow? Xiao Xian asked. Yes, I have been preparing for the rain these days. I have also practiced several times in private. These oxtails are for me to practice. Yang Sui held the oxtail and swung it at Xiao Xian. Yesterday, I broke an oxtail. This is a new one. You need an oxtail to pray for rain? Yes. Yang Sui swung the oxtail in his hand. When I pray for rain, I have to hold an oxtail in my hand. But this one is just for me to practice. When I pray for rain officially, I will use another oxtail carefully prepared by my supporters. It is not something that can be used casually. What are you going to do? If you can't pray for rain, are you going to stay here and be burned? What else can I do? Yang Sui spread out his hands. I used to think of running away when something happened, but I can't. My family and friends are here. The tribe is here. The fire is here. Where else can I run to? I don't want to be a wanderer, let alone a slave. I would rather be burned to death. The room was silent for a while. When's the next rain? Is the rainy season coming? Xiao Xian asked. There will be no rain for a while. As for the rainy season, it is later than in other places after the full moon. Yang Sui explained. This was really a problem. The rainy season had not arrived, so it did not rain. Xiao Xian could not think of a good way at the moment. Artificial rain? In this mysterious place, Xiao Xian really did not know what to do. Go back. The sand is flying. Yang Sui said, while I am still a shaman, I can provide you with some delicious food. I will ask someone to send you more water and food later. Xiao Xian looked out of the broken window. He could see the blue sky just now, but now it became a little turbid and gray. Dust began to rise in the air outside. If you stay for 2 more days, you can still see me being burned to death. Yang Sui laughed at himself. Holding the wooden box with the oxtail in his hand, he walked out of the room. I advise you to go back early, and don't go out tomorrow. Xiao Xian walked out of the wooden house and returned to the place where they rested. The surrounding visibility had decreased a lot, and the sky was a turbid yellow. The blowing wind was wrapped with sand and dust, and it was everywhere, covering the sky and the sun. The people outside were a little difficult to breathe. They squinted their eyes and choked from time to time by the dust. For the people of the Rain tribe, they were used to it, but for the young travelers who came out for the first time, they were not used to it. Looking at the dark sky, they all felt depressed. I think the place where our tribe is located is really good. Lei looked at the weather outside, closed the window and said to Xiao Xian. For Lei and others, they would rather live in the ferocious beast mountain forest than in such a desert. But for the people of the Rain tribe, they were completely opposite. They would rather live in such a place than set foot in the ferocious beast mountain forest. It's like this outside. Let's go to bed early. Maybe when we wake up, there will be no sand outside. Tuo thought optimistically. Xiao Xian was not so optimistic. Yang Sui said that it was better not to go out tomorrow. Obviously, it would be worse than today. Xiao Xian still believed in Yang Sui when it came to astronomical phenomena. As for praying for rain, rather than saying that the people of the Rain tribe worshipped the water falling from the sky, it was better to say that the people of the Rain tribe worshipped the powerful force behind the rain. The rain was just a messenger of power, a stage for the powerful and mysterious force. They believed that whoever could pray for rain had such power, and they would worship him wholeheartedly. However, whether that kind of power really existed and how powerful it was unknown. Chapter 285. In the Rain tribe's wooden house for the wanderers to rest, the traveling team rested for a night. As for how they slept, you could tell from their constipated faces the next day. When Xiao Xian opened his eyes, the light in the house was very dim. But with the biological clock formed over so many years, he knew that the sun should have come out long ago. The wooden house here was built simply, with many gaps in the roof and the surrounding wooden walls. If there was a Yang Guang outside, he could come in through these gaps. But now, the people in the house felt that it was still dark before dawn. There was a little bit of light, but it was still dark in general. What's going on? Tua turned over and got up from the wooden bed covered with hay that was slightly higher than the ground. He also felt that it should be the time when the sun should be in the sky, but he didn't see the light that should be there. He always felt a little gloomy and depressed. Huh? Tua said doubtfully. Xiao Xian also turned over and got up. As soon as his feet touched the ground, he felt a layer of soft sand on the floor of the house. Creak, Xiao Xian opened the door. The gray wind suddenly blew in, making them hold their breath. After the door was opened, there was a little dim light in the house. With the help of the light, the three people saw the situation in the house. Except for the place where they slept, there was a thick layer of dust everywhere. At this time, there was a lot of dust leaking from the roof. The people of the Rain tribe were thoughtful. Above the wooden bed, near the roof, there was a layer of straw mat. The dust leaking from the roof fell on the straw mat. No wonder I heard the rustling sound last night. It was so noisy that I couldn't sleep well. Lei looked at the situation in the house and said with a yawn. People who often hunted in the mountains would definitely not be in a deep sleep. Even the slightest movement could alert them. Even the sound of sand falling to the ground could be heard quite clearly in the quiet night with their hearing. In this weather, are we still going? Tua asked. I don't think so. Xiao Xian heard footsteps approaching outside the house. Soon, Huang Ye's figure appeared at the door of their house. Let's rest here for 2 days and set off when the weather gets better, Huang Yi said to the three people. All right, got it, Xiao Xian replied. Also, you guys be careful. Every time there is a sandstorm in this area, some things will come out. Be careful. Huang Yi had intended to warn these young soldiers who came to this place for the first time. By the way, he would make things more serious and those creatures more terrifying. Only then could these young soldiers, who were easily confused and careless, be alert. However, as they talked, Huang Yi found that the atmosphere was not right. As soon as he looked up, he saw 3 pairs of shining eyes. For some reason, he couldn't finish his sentence. After thinking about it, Huang Yi suddenly understood. That's right, the Yinjiao people were different from the people of other tribes. These Yinjiao people lived alongside ferocious beasts. How could they be afraid of creatures that suddenly appeared? Maybe they were thinking about how to catch them as food. Huang Yi was right. Xiao Xian and the other 2 really wanted to catch a few such beasts for a change. The Yinjiao people liked meat the most, and those hard flatbread really couldn't supplement them with enough energy. Huang Yi sighed. Anyway, he had delivered the message, so he turned to another wooden house to inform others. Xiao Xian looked at the sky outside. In the distance, there was a tinkling sound from the Rain tribe. Because there was too much dust, he couldn't see the situation over there. But according to Yang Sui's words, they were building an altar for praying for rain. Thinking of praying for rain, Xiao Xian sighed. When he was about to close the door, his hands suddenly stopped. Lei and Tua behind him also stopped what they were doing. The 3 people glanced at the place near the wooden table in the house. A thick layer of dust fell from the table leg, and now, the surface of the dust was slightly raised and still moving. Obviously, there was something under the dust. Lei and Tua looked at each other and almost at the same time. It's mine. It belongs to whoever grabs it. The creature under the dust was aware of the approaching danger. Suddenly, it sped up and rushed out of the house. Xiao Xian saw a slender earthy figure flashing from the door and rushing into the dust outside. It's a snake. Xiao Xian reminded the two to be careful. In such a place, snakes always had the ability to protect themselves. Maybe it was highly poisonous. Lei and Tuo were still somewhat restrained in the house, for fear that they would destroy the house and have no place to live. Now that the snake ran out, they were happy and rushed out of the house. The snake under the dust was originally buried in it. With the rapid approach of Lei and Tuo, it also suddenly shot out like a spring. It was a snake with the thickness of a thumb and a length of 1 meter. It stood up, opened its mouth, and showed 2 sharp teeth. Venom sprayed out. Xiao Xian stood at the door and could hear the sound of the venom corroding the dust. Tuo was the first to cut off the snake's head. After cutting off the snake's head, he flattened it with a knife. When they were in the forest, they would always use this method to catch snakes because some snakes would still bite people after their heads were chopped off. After learning their lesson, every time they encountered a snake, no matter what kind of snake it was, they would use this method to prevent future trouble. Ha, mine. Tuo held the headless snake in his hand and waved it at Lei. Lei did not look at the other side again, as if he was listening to something carefully. He turned around and took 2 steps back and jumped up. Under the totem pattern covering half of his arm, his muscles tightened. He swung his arm and waved the stone knife in his hand, vigorously chopping down. Boom! The hard soil on the ground exploded. Among the flying pieces of soil and dust, a figure quickly jumped out. Xiao Xian's eyes focused on the creature that rushed out. Pangolin? No, the creature looked much thicker than the scales of pangolin. Its body was more slender, nearly 2 meters. Its body color was similar to the soil, with a sandy yellow color. The whole creature did not move slowly because of a layer of hard armor. On the contrary, it moved very quickly. The creature had been looking for a chance to run away or get into the ground, but Lei and Tuo did not give it a chance. Under the joint hands of Lei and Tuo, it did not hold for more than 3 breaths and was cut down. Lei did not stay outside for a long time. He dragged the creature and seized the time to skin it. Although it was the first time he saw such a creature, he had encountered similar ones. He was not unfamiliar with the skin and handled it in 2 or 3 strokes. He did not expect to have extra water to clean it. Lei carried it into the house. Today, their food was guaranteed. The layer of hard armor was not left behind. It could be used for self-defense. They also wanted to catch another one. Unfortunately, the movement just now was too big. Even if there were more underground, they had escaped. They could only wait and see. The movement of Lei and Tuo made the people around who had stayed in the house to open the windows or doors and see what had just happened outside. Xiao Xian did not make a move just now to guard against other people, not only in the team, but also some people of the Rain tribe nearby. Not everyone of the Rain tribe was very friendly to them. Just now, some people wanted to come and grab it, but when they saw Xiao Xian staring at them, they did not make a move. After Xiao Xian and the other 2 entered the house, the others took back their sight. The people of the Yinjiao tribe are really in a house, someone said. It was true that everyone had different ideas. Xiao Xian and the other 2 lit a fire in the house and simply roasted the animal meat. Although the meat was not delicious and there was a lot of sand, it was much better than those hard flatbread. After eating, Xiao Xian planned to go out. Lei and Tuo now knew that Xiao Xian knew the current shaman of the Rain tribe, so they did not say much. After eating, they began to rest. They thought that after waking up, they would go out and see if they could catch 1 or 2 more. Against the wind and sand, Xiao Xian went to the hill yesterday. Yang Sui still stayed in the wooden house, holding an oxtail in his hand in a daze. Probably because he came here early in the morning, a layer of dust had fallen from his body. Why do you pray for rain with an oxtail? Xiao Xian went in and asked. Hearing Xiao Xian's question, Yang Sui came back to his senses and looked at Xiao Xian. He shook the oxtail in his hand and did not hide it. This was not a very important secret. It is said that in the early days, our ancestors prayed for rain and offered stones as sacrifices. Those stones are not ordinary stones, but a kind of stone called rain stones. If you dig in the nearby mountains, you can dig up some of them. It is black and very cold in hot days. The rain stones we use for rain are almost as tall as a person. When we pray for rain, we hold an oxtail and use it as a whip to whip the rain stone. Can we pray for rain like this? Xiao Xian asked. It is also accompanied by a sacrificial dance, but that is auxiliary. Whipping stones for rain is indeed the earliest way of praying for rain. But later, we don't know when the way of praying for rain changed. Our ancestors said that behind the rain stone, there is a more ancient spirit of the ancestors. It is the protector of the tribe's good weather, agriculture, and harvest. It can eliminate diseases and disasters. Everyone began to be afraid of the rain stone. In order to protect the prosperity of the tribe, we can no longer whip the rain stone, otherwise it will bring disaster. Those who whip it will not live long. When Yang Sui said this, his tone was a little sarcastic. It was not that he disrespected the ancestors, but he had doubts about some things. Ordinary people did not dare to have these doubts and would not think too much about it. Only those who had deep contact with it would investigate it deeply. The so-called "those who whip it will not live long" was probably because praying for rain consumed too much power of inheritance and needed to sacrifice some of it. Weaker people would probably be exhausted after praying for rain once. In addition, as Yang Sui said, praying for rain was getting more and more difficult. Shamans naturally had to bear a great psychological burden. After all, shamans were burned to death in the rain tribe. Under the double pressure of physiology and psychology, it would be strange to feel comfortable. If a person with a weak physique prayed for rain once, all his physical strength would be drained and he would die. Then why do you still use the oxtail instead of whipping stones for rain? Xiao Xian pointed to the oxtail in Yang Sui's hand. This is for asking for forgiveness. We ask the ancestors and the gods to forgive our mistakes. We offer the oxtail whip to pay for our sins. Yang Sui swung the oxtail in his hand casually, and his eyes flashed with sarcasm. I heard that there was a shaman who was whipped by the gods after praying for rain. Xiao Xian's face twitched. So, praying for rain was from, will it rain? If it doesn't rain, I'll whip you, to, I'll ask for rain. The people of the rain tribe played the SM game of whipping and asking for whipping with their god of rain. But there was no rain after the whipping. Chapter 286. No matter how different the process of praying for rain was, one thing was for sure, the people of the rain tribe were very realistic. No matter what kind of lies you made up, as long as it worked, they would believe it firmly and carry it out strictly. Otherwise, no matter how much you paid, if you didn't get the result they wanted, they would treat you cruelly. They could push you as high as they could before, but now they could pull you down and step you into the fire again. Take Yang Sui as an example. Compared with the Yanjiao tribe, the status of the rain tribe's shaman was really low. However, different shamans were different. If the Yanjiao tribe also had shamans like the rain tribe, they would be in the same situation as the rain tribe. Xiao Xian thought it depended on the people. Yang Sui probably thought that he didn't have much time to live, so he didn't hide his words. There were many things he couldn't say to the people in the tribe because it sounded too rebellious. But it was different for the people outside the tribe, because the people outside the tribe didn't recognize the affairs of other tribes. Yang Sui didn't hesitate to say it and vented his resentment. After a moment of silence, Yang Sui lowered his eyes and swung the oxtail on his hand. He sang in a hoarse voice, "White drizzle, yellow mud road. God in the sky, rain is the clothes." Please, this was a song that many people of the rain tribe could sing. When did they stop praying for rain? How long had it been? Hundreds of years? Thousands of years? Or even too far to remember? White drizzle, yellow mud road what kind of scene is it? I really want to see it. Yang Sui said. The records left by the ancestors were not complete, but everyone knew the songs passed down from generation to generation. Unfortunately, no one could imagine what kind of scene was described in this song. No one knew, because those who knew were no longer around. I heard that when praying for rain is successful, the rain falls down in a line, and all the ground becomes mud. People walk barefoot on the wet mud and enjoy the washing of the rain. Yang Sui said. Mud wasn't a derogatory term here. For the people of the Rain tribe, mud was a scene they looked forward to because in most of their memories, the ground was hard and cracked. While they were talking, the girl named Misu, whom Xiao Xian had met yesterday, came over with an unconcealed anger on her face. She probably didn't expect to see Xiao Xian here. Surprise flashed across her face, but she didn't pay much attention to him. She turned to look at Yang Sui, who was sitting on the ground. Two more quit. Those bastards. Misu was very agitated. Yang Sui tightened his grip on the oxtail and said calmly. If you don't want to do it, then don't do it. Let's see who is willing to fill the vacancy. Those who are willing to fill the vacancy will get double the shell coins. What's the point of adding shellfish? Misu roared. He Chao took them away with shellfish. If you can give him shell coins, why can't he? Yesterday, one of them had already left. It was hard to find someone to fill the vacancy, but now, another one had left. Who else could it be? Who knows if anyone will leave today? The He Chao mentioned by Misu was the shaman's competitor with Yang Sui. Yang Sui won that time, but now, the chief Hang Mang supported He Chao and suppressed Yang Sui. Day by day, Yang Sui's supporters were decreasing rapidly. Yesterday, Yang Sui said that the other side had more than half of his supporters. But the next day, half of his supporters were gone. They probably thought that Yang Sui, the shaman, couldn't pray for rain, and even the shamans who followed him would suffer. Before, there were still some people who followed Yang Sui because of the supporters behind him. But now, under the coercion of the He Chao and the chief Hang Mang, a group of supporters stood on the opposite side. Naturally, there were also some shamans who changed their positions. According to the requirement of praying for rain, all 8 shamans were indispensable. But now, they couldn't find a suitable person to fill the vacancy. If they couldn't fill the vacancy, they couldn't even pray for rain. They failed directly. This was the rule set by the ancestors, and it couldn't be changed. Want to change it? Well, if you could pray for rain, the people of the Rain tribe would certainly not object. But if you couldn't pray for rain, you could only follow the rules. And, Misu took 2 deep breaths to calm herself down, and then said, the oxtail they prepared for you was also taken back and given to He Chao. Not only was the person taken away, but even the well-prepared oxtail was also given to the enemy. Praying for rain? How could he pray? If it went on like this, he didn't need to prepare anything. He just needed to prepare to be burned to death. What should we do? The ceremony will begin tomorrow. Misu was so anxious that she walked around the room. Are there any oxen in the surrounding mountains? I can go and look for them. Xiao Xian said. No need. Yang Sui waved his hand and raised the dusty oxtail in his hand to Xiao Xian, and said, this is enough. Which oxtail can't be used as a whip? The ancestors didn't say what kind of oxtail must be. What about the witch? Xiao Xian asked. If you need shell coins or something else, I also have some here. We don't need shell coins. We also have some. When Misu looked at Xiao Xian, her face softened a lot. Although Xiao Xian was not a member of the Rain tribe, she was grateful that he was willing to help at this time. But, we don't have enough witch. As soon as Misu's voice fell, a voice came from outside, who said it's not enough. Yang Sui, who was sitting on the ground, suddenly jumped up and looked at the door in astonishment. A pair of calloused hands moved away the shabby wooden door that was blocking the entrance. Xiao Xian saw two middle-aged women with dark complexions coming in one after another. Behind them, there was an old man with gray hair. Although he was old, he was still healthy and his steps were steady. He didn't show much old age. "If you don't have enough people, we can do it," the middle-aged woman who came in first said. "Mother. Grandmother." Yang Sui looked at the people who came in and was shocked. "Mother." Mi Su was also shocked and didn't know what to say. The three people who came in were Yang Sui's mother, grandmother and Mi Su's mother. When they saw Xiao Xian, they were slightly surprised. But after Xiao Xian introduced himself, they showed their friendliness and thanked Xiao Xian. They knew that Xiao Xian had helped Yang Sui. You. Yang Sui stuttered. "What about us? Our ancestors never said that the witch must be young." Yang Sui's mother said. Their ancestors didn't mention it, but in the Rain tribe, women with long, slender, and curvaceous bodies were considered beautiful. Therefore, when they chose their shamans, they would also choose such young women. Some families would even cultivate them from a young age. So far, there had never been a woman who was older than middle-aged to be a witch. After all, the middle-aged women in the tribe were naturally not as tall as those young people because of hard work. But now, as more and more people changed sides, they couldn't even find 8 witches. So the 3 elders decided to do this. If other people became witches, even if Yang Sui failed to pray for rain, they wouldn't be in danger. But Yang Sui's family was different. The new chief's group was against Yang Sui, so they would be more harsh to Yang Sui's family. Maybe they would even be burned to death together. Looking at the crying people in the house, Xiao Xian left the wooden house. Several middle-aged men stood outside the house to protect it. They should be Yang Sui's relatives or elders. No wonder Yang Sui didn't want to leave these people. They were the only ones in the Rain tribe who would sincerely protect him at this time. Outside the house, it was still muddy and the visibility was low. Xiao Xian planned to walk outside. He wanted to see what he could do to help. Not far away, a lizard as long as half an arm was crawling. Suddenly, a creature rushed out from the sand. Xiao Xian looked over and found that it was the same species as the one they had eaten not long ago. Poor guy, who had just rushed out to look for food, was killed by Xiao Xian before he could eat the meat. Chapter 287. Xiao Xian dragged the hunted prey back for dinner for the 3 of them. When Xiao Xian left, Chu Su and Hong Shi of the Feather tribe went to find Xiao Xian. Chu Su was bored and didn't see Xiao Xian, so he told Lane Tuo about the Rain tribe as jokes to pass the time. Hong Shi came to find Xiao Xian to fight, but he didn't find him, so he left. After listening to Chu Su's gossip, Tuo and Lei asked Xiao Xian about the Rain tribe. Xiao Xian told them about it, but they also knew what the situation was now, so they couldn't believe it. How could they treat the shaman like this? In the Yinjiao tribe, no one dared to say no to the shaman. However, they were not interested in the affairs of other tribes, so they just sighed, "Poor thing." Like the others in the team, they didn't believe that they could pray for rain here, so they just took it as a casual topic. At dusk, Yang Sui sent someone to find Xiao Xian. As the shaman of the Rain tribe, Yang Sui couldn't come here directly. If he was seen at such a time, it would easily cause trouble to Xiao Xian. It was still the shabby wooden house, but now there was no one else in the house except Yang Sui. He lit a fire and sat on the ground, waiting for Xiao Xian. Next to Yang Sui, there was a bulging animal skin bag. Tomorrow was the day to pray for rain, but Yang Sui didn't seem to be in a hurry. He just looked more silent than during the day. "What's the matter?" Xiao Xian entered the house and asked. "Xiao Xian, I beg you to do me a favor." Yang Sui pleaded. "You go first." Xiao Xian found a place to sit down, waiting for Yang Sui's next words. Yang Sui handed the animal skin bag next to him to Xiao Xian. "If I can't survive tomorrow, my parents and Mi Su will be sent out. You help, Yang Sui probably knew that his request was a little too much, so he stopped halfway. In terms of friendship, Xiao Xian and he were not that close. If Xiao Xian helped him, he would directly go against the Rain tribe. Before Xiao Xian spoke, Yang Sui hurriedly said, I just want you to help them leave the Rain tribe. He Chao and the others want to target me. If they leave the tribe, they will be expelled at most, not hunted. Yang scratched his head, if they are expelled, I hope they can go to the Yanjiao tribe, the ferocious beasts mountain forest. I heard that wanderers followed you. He Sui continued to talk about the tribe and Xian, continued to talk about his follow-up arrangements. He mentioned many people, a lot people, but didn't talk about himself. Xiao Xian didn't look at the animal skin bag with the shell coins. He asked, is there no chance? No. Xian, helplessly. Said S's. Said Yang. I hope so. Yang Sui forced a smile. He didn't believe it himself, so he just said it casually. If he could really pray for rain, the new chief and He Chao would be nothing. Yang Sui would not be kicked off the stage, but would stand higher and more stable. But, it was impossible. Don't worry. If I can help, I will definitely help. Cha-Cha also came, but now it's hiding away because of the sand. Xiao Xian didn't return the bag of shell coins. Yang Sui didn't feel relieved until he took them. When the time came, if Yang Sui's parents and relatives were really expelled, Xiao Xian would give them back and draw a map to the Yanjiao tribe for them. Hearing Xiao Xian's words, Yang Sui showed a rare relaxed expression, thank you. Xiao Xian waved his hand and asked, if you can't get rain with one method, can't you use another method? For example, you can use the method of whipping stones to pray for rain. Yang Sui smiled and said in a self-mocking tone, it's no use. Not to mention that the rules set by the ancestors can't be easily changed. In fact, as long as you have the ability to pray for rain, whatever you do is right. If there's a problem, whatever you do will be wrong. Xiao Xian was stunned. You mean, the key is the shaman? Not the other methods? You can say that. But now the decisive point is not the shaman, but the fire seed. Yang Sui hesitated and said, the fire seed of the Rain tribe has a problem. The fire seed has a problem? Xiao Xian was confused. The shaman can start praying for rain, and the fire seed determines the success or failure of praying for rain. Because the fire seed has a problem, no matter how it prays, it can't rain. It was by chance that I found a secret record of a shaman. That's how I came to know about this. They said that the fire seed seems to be asleep. When the shaman prays for rain, he can't wake it up. It only wakes up once a year during the big sacrifice. At other times, it won't wake up. If it's during the big sacrifice, it's likely to succeed. However, during the big sacrifice, it's not a dry season and it's very cold, so people don't have a strong desire to pray for rain. Outside the big sacrifice ceremony, the fire seed is asleep and can't be woken up, so it's impossible to pray for rain. Yang Sui found the hidden animal skin roll by chance. The animal skin roll was still buried under the ground, and only the shaman could understand the symbols and characters on it. You can't wake it up? Xiao Xian asked. If I could wake it up, would have succeeded. I wouldn't have waited until now. Moreover, this situation has been going on for a long time. In fact, the purpose of the rule that the candidates must travel outside is not to find a way to solve the problem. The main purpose of this rule is to choose a stronger person to be the shaman. Only by becoming stronger can the fire seed be more likely to awaken. Yang Sui patted Xiao Xian and said, don't tell others, or the Rain tribe will be in chaos. If the tribe was in chaos, even if the current chief could control it, he couldn't really control people's panic. If it went on for a long time, the development of the Rain tribe would become more abnormal. If it was more serious, it might slowly go to destruction. Therefore, those who knew these secrets would hide them until they died. Don't worry, I won't tell others. Xiao Xian promised. Their Yanjiao tribe was far away, and the Rain tribe had no influence on the tribe. Besides, Xiao Xian was not a talkative person. After chatting for a while, Yang Sui got up and left to prepare for the death ceremony the next day. For him, the ceremony of praying for rain tomorrow was the death ceremony. Xiao Xian also took the bag of shell coins back to the resting place. The next day, the sand in the sky was more serious. The wind and sand were flying, and the visibility was even lower. It was like a sandstorm. The people in the team all stayed in the wooden house except for going out to trade and look for food. The weather outside was so bad that they didn't want to go out and eat sand. Knowing that today was the time of the Rain tribes praying for a rain ceremony, no one planned to get close to the Rain tribe. At this time, the Rain tribe's defense was even stricter. We can't watch the fun, and the weather is bad. Alas. Chu Su leaned on the window and looked at the flying sand outside. Close it quickly, the sand is blowing in. The people in the house scolded. With a sigh, Chu Su closed the window and asked the people in the house, "Do you think the people of the Rain tribe can really pray for rain? Do you believe this?" These small tribes just like to exaggerate and brag. Not only the people of the Mang tribe, but also other people had similar thoughts. They didn't really wait to see if it would rain. They took advantage of these 2 days to rest more. Once the weather was better, they would have to set off again. The following road would be difficult to walk, and it would be difficult to find a place to rest. In the Rain tribe. On a high platform built above the fire pit, some things needed for the ceremony of praying for rain were put on it. They didn't need to worry about the fire in the fire pits suddenly because they had never seen such a situation except for the time of the great sacrifice at the beginning of each year. A lot of people had gathered around the fire pit, and everyone was whispering. Some people were really praying for rain, regardless of who the shamans were. Their farmland had a lot of crops. Some people just wanted to see Yang Sui make a fool of himself. The people headed by He Chao belonged to the new chief's side. They looked at Yang Sui with gloomy and expectant eyes. They were looking forward to seeing Yang Sui being pushed to the fire by the people of the tribe after he failed to pray for rain. Look over there. It's nonsense. How dare Yang Sui? Are they really going to pray for rain? The rain god will be angry. He Chao followed the eyes of the crowd and saw Yang Sui wearing the yellow and green woven clothes for the ceremony of praying for rain, followed by 8 shamans. He Chao's eyes almost popped out of their sockets when he saw those shamans. They had coerced some people to leave Yang Sui, so that Yang Sui couldn't gather enough shamans for the ceremony of praying for rain. But they didn't expect that Yang Sui would do this. Where was the flexible body like flowing water? Where were the young and soft girls? Where were the shamans that were cultivated from childhood? Why were there several old women? What was that? Was it a ball? Misu's mother once ate a plant by mistake, which caused her bones to change and her body to be fat, looking like a ball. Even if she was starving to death, she would still maintain this fat appearance. The ceremonial clothes made overnight were a little loose, which made her look even fatter. Although Yang Sui's mother was not so fat, her figure was obviously different from those of the young girls. She didn't have the flexible feeling of flowing water. As for Yang Sui's grandmother, needless to say, she stood there conspicuously. The team of 9 people came out of a house near the fire pit and went straight to the altar. Wherever they went, the people around them avoided them like snakes and scorpions. Some people who were slow to react because of shock also stepped back a few steps after coming to their senses, for fear of being mistaken as having anything to do with these people. Some elders in the tribe who thought they were highly respected almost rolled their eyes and fell down when they saw this scene. How dare they? What a mess. What a bastard. Was he fooling the tribesmen or insulting the ancestors? It was certain that he had offended the gods. God. Yang Sui made such a mess. If the gods were angry, would it never rain in the future? Some people who were too old fainted because they were too excited, and there was another riot. The people who were far away couldn't see the situation over there because of the strong wind and sand, but when they heard the news, they were shocked and speechless for a long time. After coming to their senses, they cursed Yang Sui and his family with the people around them. They should be expelled. Burn them to death, they must be burned to death. Burn them to death. Ask the gods for forgiveness. Chapter 288. Stop them. Stop them. The chief Hang Mang shouted and rushed towards them. He had planned to watch them make fun of themselves, so he didn't approach them. But when he saw Yang Sui and the others, his face turned blue with regret. This was not a slap to the face of the new chief, but a provocation to the ancestors. Offending the gods. But thinking about it carefully, it seemed that, the ancestors didn't say what kind of person they should use as the witch. But Yang Sui's behavior was indeed a provocation to the ancestors. In his opinion, it was a very unlucky behavior. When the new chief Hang Mang called people, Yang Sui and the others had already stepped on the steps of the altar of the rain-praying ceremony. Once they stepped on the high platform, it meant that the prayer for rain began. Hang Mang, who had chased them here, clenched his fists tightly and almost spat out blood. He didn't pull out his knife and cut Yang Sui. If Yang Sui hadn't stepped on the altar, he would have killed them on the spot, and no one in the tribe would have said anything. However, these people moved too fast, and he was one step late. Hang Mang glanced at the 9 people who were walking step by step to the high platform with his sharp eyes. He still stepped back and didn't approach the fire pit, for fear of being contaminated with bad luck. He couldn't do it now, but when the ceremony was over. Yang Sui, wait for your death. Sacrifice your blood to the gods. Yang Sui didn't look back to see the reaction of the tribesmen, but he knew what would happen to him when he heard the voices below. At this time, he regretted again. Perhaps, he should have given up before, so that the tribesmen wouldn't have reacted like this. He was most worried about his friends and relatives who had followed him up. Thinking of this, Yang Sui's steps slowed down unconsciously. At this time, Yang Sui heard the words behind him. Since you're here, you can't turn back. Keep going. This was the voice of Yang Sui's mother. We've come up, and we don't intend to go back. This was Mi Chio's mother. Don't worry, we'll be with you. This was Mi Chio. Although the others didn't say anything, Yang Sui knew their choice when he listened to their footsteps. Yang Sui held the oxtail so hard that blue veins bulged on the back of his hand. After a short pause, he lifted his foot and walked up again. For the rain-praying ceremony, sacrificial objects, decorations, and ceremonial guards had been prepared on the high platform. In addition, there was also a prescribed rain-praying dance and the necessary congratulatory incantation. No matter if it was a rain dance or a congratulatory speech, there needed to be music. Naturally, there also needed to be a performer. Originally, Yang Sui had spent a lot of money to invite people. However, when Yang Sui walked up to the high platform, he found that his father, uncle, and grandfather were all there. Watching Yang Sui standing there in a daze, Yang Sui's father smiled towards Yang Sui with a kongju in hand. Since he had come, he had no intention of going down. Perhaps, without waiting for the ceremony to end, the people in the tribe would set up firewood under the high platform and start a fire. Yang Sui stood on the high platform and looked at the people around him. He gave them a smile, although it looked like he was crying. Dong dong. Bang bang bang, rhythmic music sounded. Holding the oxtail in his hand, Yang Sui looked at the rainstone in the middle of the high platform and closed his eyes. There had never been such a moment when he hoped that rain would fall from the sky, even if it was just a few drops. Although he had always doubted his ancestors, questioned the gods, and criticized them many times, at this moment, he really hoped that his ancestors and the gods could help him this time, just this time. He was willing to pay any price. Yang Sui respectfully presented the oxtail to the rainstone with both hands. He waved his sleeves. His wide sleeves were a little stiff due to the material, so they weren't as elegant as gauze and ribbons. However, as he waved his hand, the wooden nut bells tied to his sleeves also moved along with his arm, producing a clattering sound. The 9 dancers jumped and twisted their limbs, making the clicking sound more intensive, like the sound of raindrops hitting the ground. The rain-praying dance of the Rain tribe had a feature, that was, they needed to dance with their heads up. For many tribes, it was normal and not unusual to dance with their heads up during the sacrificial dance. However, the Rain tribe was different. In their sacrificial dance, the dancers needed to always look up to the sky. The god of rain they worshipped was naturally in the sky. They had to pray to the god and express the desires of the people of the tribe, hoping to be protected by the god. Of course, they had to look up to the sky with reverence. And Yang Sui also took this opportunity to observe the movement in the sky. Although the wind and sand were flying and he couldn't open his eyes, Yang Sui could still see the changes in the sky. This was his ability that was different from others. He relied on this to speculate the weather. There was no rain. There was no sign of rain at all. Yang Sui gritted his teeth and continued. He knew that he was different from others. This was his pride. Perhaps, he could really break the deadlock and do what the ancestors couldn't do. If he worked harder, maybe it would be soon. There was no need for heavy rain, just 2 drops would be enough. 2 drops would be enough. Gradually, he felt that the power in his body was being drawn away, and he could feel the change of the fire seed. Although there was still no rain in the sky, it was a good thing since the fire seed had changed. The people of the Rain tribe standing below couldn't see the situation on the high platform at all, but some people close to the fire pit felt the change in the fire pit. Hang Mang saw that the fire seed in the fire pit changed from the original red color to light gradually. And the surrounding temperature seemed to be reduced a little. This. An old man rubbed his eyes, and his face was full of disbelief. The muscles on He Chao's face twitched, and he said, in the past, when the shaman prayed for rain, such a situation also happened, but he didn't succeed in the end. An old man on the side glanced at He Chao with sharp eyes, which made He Chao's scalp numb. He wanted to say something, but he had to shut up. Although many people supported them, some people were neutral. These people didn't care who was the shaman. They only cared about whether they could succeed in praying for rain. However, soon, as He Chao said, the color of the fire seed changed and the temperature decreased. It began to return to its original state. Those who expected to succeed in praying for rain showed disappointment in their eyes. Yang Sui, who was praying for rain, could feel that his heart was cold even if he couldn't see the change of the fire seed. Even if he had been mentally prepared, he was still very disappointed at this time. It was like after hysterical roaring, he found that the person he wanted to wake up just yawned slowly and continued to sleep. He was unwilling, but it was useless. The dance of praying for rain was almost over. After the fire seed became lighter, it returned to its original color. He Chao's eyes flashed with joy. Looking at the large bundles of firewood not far from the fire pit, he was so excited that his hands trembled a little, and he couldn't wait to laugh out loud. Now, he only hoped that the rain-praying ceremony on the high platform would end quickly. As long as it was over, he could ask people to set up a fire on the high platform. At this moment, at the border of the Rain tribe, Shao Xian, who stayed in the wooden house, was doubtfully observing a new pattern in the egg-shaped shell in his mind. Shao Xian had seen the new pattern here. Such a totem was engraved outside the wooden house where they lived. This was the totem of the Rain tribe. Just like the totem of the Drumming tribe, it was far smaller than the totem of the Yanjiao tribe, and it only appeared on the side, near the eggshell. Chapter 289. Above the totem of the Rain tribe was an arc. Under the arc, there were rain-like dots. Shao Xian counted, there were 8 dots. Around the totem, there were some fog-like things flowing around it. When the totem of the Drumming tribe appeared in this eggshell, Shao Xian was very surprised. Now, the totem of the Rain tribe also appeared. The compatibility was good. Xiao Xian thought. Although the totem that appeared was not as big as the one of the Yanjiao tribe in the middle, nor was it as bright as the one of the Yanjiao tribe, it did exist here, and it was still flashing. The totem of the Rain tribe was not the same red color as the one of the Yanjiao tribe. Instead, it was similar to the one of the Drumming tribe, white and translucent, like liquid. Xiao Xian observed the flashing totem of the Rain tribe. He mobilized the power of inheritance and wanted to observe the totem of this foreign tribe closely. The blue flames separated from the bottom of the flames around the Yanjiao totem and reached out to the much smaller totem of the Rain tribe. It was reasonable to say that the totem of different tribes should repel each other. But here, it was not so. The blue flames separated from the totem of the Rain tribe easily touched it. At the moment of contact, Xiao Xian felt that the totem of the Rain tribe trembled, and the 8 dots also moved. Xiao Xian was curious. The 8 dots looked more like drops of liquid suspended in the air. A bright liquid drop fell from the totem of the Rain tribe. Xiao Xian stared at the drop point, intending to see where it would fall. Unexpectedly, the drop just fell a little. After it went beyond the totem of the Rain tribe, it turned into mist and merged with the mist around the totem of the Rain tribe. Looking at the totem again, the gap where it originally fell had been filled, and a drop of the same liquid appeared there. And this was just the beginning. As if the starting switch was pressed, the dots on the totem of the Rain tribe gradually began to fall like the previous one, turning into mist and forming again. From 1 drop at the beginning, 2 drops, until 8 drops, all began to move and rotate, looking like it was raining constantly. Somehow, Xiao Xian suddenly remembered what Yang Sui had told him about the fire seed of the Rain tribe. Yang Sui said that there was a problem with the fire seed of the Rain tribe. Except for the time of the big sacrifice at the beginning of each year, it was difficult to wake it up at other times. This was also the reason why praying for rain had always failed. But now, Xiao Xian felt that this moving totem was like gradually waking up from a deep sleep. Xiao Xian's heart skipped a beat. He felt a powerful force from the outside world. Out of the sea of consciousness, Xiao Xian looked to the side. Although the room was dark because of the weather, Xiao Xian could still see the reaction of Lei and Tuo. The two who were resting stood up and looked in the direction of the Rain tribe. What's going on? Why is there such a strong totem power? Feeling the sudden rejection of the totem of a different tribe, Lei and Tuo opened the door and went out. Outside, the wind and sand were blowing, more so than the previous 2 days. Lei's messy hair was blown up by the wind, and his eyes narrowed into slits because of the sand and dust. They could clearly smell the wind and sand between their breaths. The sky and the surroundings were full of yellow sand and dust. The visibility was very low. It was hard to see this row of wooden houses, let alone the farther place of the Rain tribe. They wanted to see what was going on over there, but all they could see was a piece of turbid yellow sand. Xiao Xian covered his face slightly with his hand to block the sand and dust blowing directly. He listened carefully to the sound over there. It was a little noisy and there were too many people. He didn't know what was going on over there. But he could clearly feel the gradually increasing totem power in that direction. Not only Xiao Xian, but other people in the team also came out, but found that there was nothing around them. The wind and sand were still strong. They complained and went back to the house. What do you think is going on over there? Is praying for rain so loud? Someone asked. I don't know what praying for rain is like. Anyway, it certainly won't rain. Don't worry about that. I just hope the weather will get better soon so we can leave. In the Rain tribe, on the altar built by the fire pit, Yang Sui and others had finished praying for rain. Finally, everyone knelt down and kowtowed on the wooden board full of sand with their foreheads on the ground. They didn't get up. Yang Sui and others who knelt down were the same. They were silent, waiting for death. From the moment they stepped on the high platform, they didn't intend to go down again. The wooden nut bell was tied with a rope, swaying in the wind and making a clicking sound. It sounded like a shower, but it was just, not real. The ceremony was over, and the music and dance stopped. Under the altar, the kneeling people got up. Some people were disappointed. Although they had failed for many years, they still held a little hope every time, hoping that rain would really come. Some people had been used to this situation every year, with numbness on their faces. As for the others, they were overjoyed. For example, He Chao, who had competed with Yang Sui for the position of the shaman. He Chao looked at the chief Hang Mang in front of him, took 2 steps forward and whispered, "It's okay." Hang Mang's eyes flashed, and he looked at the old men a few steps away. Among them, there were their supporters and some neutrals. He was worried about those neutrals. Fortunately, the failure of praying for rain didn't cover the disappointment on those people's faces. Seeing this, Hang Mang couldn't help but smile and said loudly, "Because Yang Sui deceived the ancestors, violated the ancestors' will, and angered the rain god, from today on, he will no longer be the shaman of the tribe." Hang Mang and He Chao looked around. Those who had opposed them before were now silent. Very good. After Hang Mang's words, He Chao suppressed the excitement in his heart and shouted, "Set up the firewood." The people who had been waiting there carried bundles of firewood and withered grass and placed them around the high platform, all the way up to the high platform. The people on the high platform heard the movement below clearly. With the movement of the firewood gradually approaching, Yang Sui said in a voice that could be heard by everyone on the high platform, "I'm sorry." Under the platform, He Chao, who was most likely to take over the position of the shaman after Yang Sui, walked to the high platform with a lit torch and lit all the firewood around the high platform. "Burn them to death. Burn them to death, burn them to death. Those who violated the ancestors and angered the rain god should be burned to death." Listening to the curses below, Yang Sui closed his eyes and waited for death with the others. The failure of praying for rain almost consumed all his energy. Exhaustion, despair, and sorrow. Suddenly, Yang Sui's body trembled, and his closed eyes suddenly opened, full of disbelief. He felt it carefully and found it was right. Fire seed. It was the fire seed. Below, the people who had been shouting, "Burn them to death," also felt something wrong, especially those who were close to the fire pit. They were so familiar with this kind of power. Every year during the grand sacrifice, they would have this kind of feeling. However, now was not the time for the grand sacrifice, and the situation was different compared with the grand sacrifice. The surrounding temperature began to drop rapidly. Through the firewood, they saw that the color of the fire in the fire pit changed again. It became lighter and became white and translucent. This is, the wind and sand around the fire pit seemed to disappear gradually, and the vision became clearer. An old man, whose palms were full of calluses and cracked skin, rubbed his fingers and felt the little bit of moisture on his fingers. He raised his eyes to the fire pit and then looked at the high platform built above the fire pit. Thinking of something, his originally confused expression turned into shock. He shouted loudly, "Extinguish the fire. Put out the fire. Go away." Because he was too excited, his voice was a little hoarse. He ran to the high platform, and regardless of the burning firewood, he waved his arms and kicked off all the firewood on the platform. Hang Mang only felt a chill rushing to his head. He was so shocked that he almost rushed to the platform as fast as he could and kicked away the firewood with the old man. The others also reacted. No matter what happened, they just needed to follow the old man. Those who were far away couldn't see the situation around the fire pit clearly, and they could only guess what had happened by listening to the movement. Although they couldn't see clearly, they could feel the familiar power from the fire seed. In the fire pit, the white and translucent flame rose. Starting from the top, it turned into a white mist and rushed out of the fire pit like a dragon out of the water. The surrounding temperature dropped even lower. The firewood that had not been kicked away was extinguished the moment it was swept by the mist. Yang Sui couldn't see what was happening below, and he didn't get up. He just looked up at the sky. Then, his face, which was as stiff as a stone, cracked, and his expression was both happy and surprised. It seemed that the sky was going to rain. Below, around the fire pit, the white mist was like a long dragon. At first, it just hovered around the fire pit, and then as its body grew bigger, the hovering range became wider and wider. People standing near the fire pit couldn't help but step back. They weren't sure what such a change meant, but there was a faint guess in their hearts, a guess that even they couldn't believe. With the hovering of the mist dragon, wherever it passed, the piles on the high platform and the piles of unlit or extinguished firewood seemed to be covered with a layer of frost. The mist dragon was still expanding rapidly, and within a range outside the fire pit, the sense of chaos caused by the sand and dust was quickly disappearing. Taking a deep breath, people could feel a refreshing coolness. There was no smell of sand and dust, which made people feel shocked, as if they had been poured a bucket of ice water. Because of such a change, the other people of the Rain tribe were stunned. They didn't know what it meant, nor did they know how to react now. The chief didn't say anything. Is praying for rain successful? Someone stammered and asked the people around him. Others wanted to refute because of their previous experience, but after seeing the scene over there, they closed their mouths tightly. Chapter 290. The huge fog dragon, which made people look up, circled around the high platform of the fire pit, broke through the wind and sand in the sky, and spiraled up, as if nothing could stop it. At this time, the people on the high platform also saw the white fog belt that they had never seen before. When the fog passed by the high platform, everyone on the high platform felt the fresh and cool deep into their hearts and lungs, as if they were in winter. However, in winter, there was no such fresh feeling. What is that? Misu looked at the fog spiraling up past them and asked. Yang Sui was still kneeling with his hands on the ground, but he had been looking up to observe the changes in the sky. Almost every second, the expression on Yang Sui's face changed a little. Hearing Misu's question, he did not answer. From the joy and surprise just now to the crying and laughing now, others must think he was crazy. But at this time, almost no one could look at the change at the moment with a normal mentality. His eyes were fixed on the sky, and his expression was changing. Yang Sui seemed to want to say something, but he couldn't find the specific words and didn't know how to say it. Finally, it only turned into a roar to vent. Feeling the bitterness in his eyes, Yang Sui didn't care what other people thought. He looked up to the sky, and now he just wanted to roar. All his emotions and all his words were in this roar. It was going to rain. Yang Sui had never been so excited to tears because of such a change in the sky. He was so excited that he couldn't speak. Could it be that the ancestors were moved? Or the gods were showing mercy? At the border of the Rain tribe, Lei and Tua had already entered the house, and only Xiao Xian stayed outside. Xian, don't eat sand outside. Seeing Xiao Xian didn't enter for a long time, Lei shouted loudly. However, after waiting for a long time, only Xiao Xian said, "Come out and see." "What's there to see?" Lei muttered. However, since Xiao Xian had spoken, Lei and Tua still had to give face to the elder who was not as old as themselves. Originally, they still had some ideas, but after going out, Lei and Tua were stunned. When they came out just now, there was a sandstorm outside. However, how long had it been? They hadn't even finished drinking their cups of water when the weather outside changed. The people in the other wooden houses heard Xiao Xian's voice and curiously opened their windows to see what the Yinjiao people were up to. After he removed the window panel, he thought that sand would be blown in, so he squinted his eyes. However, after squinting for a long time, he did not see any sand. On the contrary, when he looked out, there was no sand at all. "Ah!" Someone screamed. The others also walked out and looked at the changes outside. The chaotic sandstorm had changed, and the yellow sand had disappeared. Standing here, they could still see the situation of the Rain tribe. Although it was still a little hazy, it was much better than the previous situation where they couldn't even see 10 steps away. "Look, what's that in the sky?" Chu Su shouted, pointing at the sky above the Rain tribe. In the sky above the Rain tribe, a long white belt that looked like an ancient giant beast rotated up from below. Its tail was on the ground and its head was in the sky. From the ground up, the long white belt was getting wider and wider. In the sky, there was no chaotic yellow sand. Instead, there were gradually accumulated dark clouds in the sky. The head of the white, giant beast seemed to be the place where the dark clouds were made. From there, the dark clouds spread to the surroundings. The tumbling dark clouds were like an army of thousands of men and horses clad in heavy armor. They forcefully expanded into the surroundings, bringing the heavy sense of oppression to an even further place. They succeeded in praying for rain. Xiao Xian looked at the changes in the sky and said. As soon as Xiao Xian's voice fell, someone shouted, "Impossible." However, looking at the changes in the sky now, it really looked like it was going to rain. If they were still surrounded by the chaotic yellow sand, they would not believe that there would be rain even if they were beaten to death. However, in the current situation, they felt powerless even if they wanted to refute. Huang Yi and other elders all looked serious. They had been involved in this expedition team since they were young, and had been in contact with the Rain tribe. They had also experienced the Rain tribe's ceremony of praying for rain, but they had never been so shocked as they were now. It seemed that the rain could really be prayed for. Xiao Xian observed the totem of the Rain tribe in the eggshell in his mind. It was still flashing, and the droplets on the totem were rolling faster. The humidity around was getting heavier. A water droplet the size of a grain of rice fell from the sky. Its size was not conspicuous, but under the gloomy sky, under the unblinking gazes of the crowd, this water droplet was still discovered by some people. It was different from the ordinary raindrops, but with a little white. Under the gloomy sky, it was like the shining light emitted by the underwater creatures in the deep sea. Thud. The raindrop hit the ground, making a soft sound. Thud, 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 thud. More and more sounds appeared, and they were getting denser and denser. Looking up at the sky covered with thick dark clouds, the white light spots fell straight down, like scattered meteors. At first, it was just some raindrops, but soon, these raindrops seemed to be strung into a line, falling down little by little. The ground covered with sand and dust softened with water. The dry and hard clods softened in the falling rain and became mud. Xiao Xian raised his finger and dipped it in the water, licked it, and then decisively took out the almost empty kettle, poured out the water inside, and collected the rainwater. Because it was a gourd with a thin mouth, Xiao Xian also went to find a leaf, let the rain wash it clean, and then swirled it into a funnel, inserted it into the mouth of the gourd, and began to collect the water. In addition to the gourd, there were water bags made of animal skin bags, and Xiao Xian also took them for backup. This area was too dry, and it was rare to encounter rain, so naturally, more water was prepared. The water of the Rain tribe looked extraordinary. Maybe this water could help them in the future. Seeing Xiao Xian's behavior, Lei and Tuo did not say much and did the same. The other people in the team looked at each other and looked at the elders who brought them out of the tribe. Seeing them nod, they also took out the things that contained water and began to collect it. In the Rain tribe, it was crazy now. Under the rain, people ran like madmen, trampling on the muddy ground, screaming and roaring. Just like Yang Sui, he didn't know what to say. His mind seemed to have lost all reason, and he just wanted to roar at the moment. The rain came. It really succeeded in praying for rain. White drizzle, sandy yellow mud road. How many years had it been? The few who died with regret, never having seen the scene in the song until their deaths. And now, all the people in the Rain tribe who were still alive had witnessed this scene. How could they not be excited? Why not be crazy? However, for He Chao, his mood was completely different. Others felt cool, but he felt cold to the bone, shivering and wishing to shrink himself into a ball. There was no doubt that Yang Sui had turned over. Not only did he turn over, but he might even reach a height that no shaman of the Rain tribe could reach in these years. Thinking of his previous actions, He Chao only felt a deeper chill. The falling rain was like a heavy hammer, hammering his body again and again, causing him to be unable to breathe. He gasped for air, but he was choked by the rain. On the high platform, Yang Sui felt the falling rain. He got up and walked to the edge of the platform, looking at the crazy crowd under the platform. At this time, no one shouted, "Burn to death," no one complained about Yang Sui's mistakes, and no one cared whether Yang Sui really deceived them or not. They only believed in their own eyes and believed in the result. This rain was undoubtedly the best proof. All the stains, whether true or not, would be washed away in this rain. No one knew who saw Yang Sui on the high platform first, or who knelt down first, but it triggered a rapid chain reaction. A large number of people knelt down in the muddy water and knelt down devoutly towards the high platform at the fire pit. This was a scene that had never happened for at least hundreds of years. Maybe some chiefs had been treated like this, but none of the shamans had. Yang Sui became the first shaman to receive such a high level of treatment in these years. What? The chief said he wanted to change the shaman? I don't agree. I won't agree even if you beat me to death. You want to change the shaman? If you have the guts, step over our dead bodies. As He Chao thought, Yang Sui would definitely reach a height that those ancestors could not reach in the future. Among the people kneeling under the high platform, including the high-ranking elders in the tribe and the new chief Hang Mang, their behavior showed everything. Looking at the situation below, Yang Sui's excitement gradually calmed down. They could throw Yang Sui into the fire pit without hesitation, and they could also put Yang Sui on the throne with sincerity. Chapter 291. The dusty weather had passed, and the team would not stay in the rain tribe. Huang Yi and others decided to set off tomorrow, and the rain would not last until tomorrow. The rain had become smaller, and the rain that fell down in silk threads had now become drops again. The thick clouds in the sky had begun to open, and the golden yang guang poured down. It was believed that it would not be long before the sky would clear up. I didn't expect that they could really pray for rain. Tuo was amazed. Is that why it's called the Rain Tribe? Lei said. Not only Lei and Tuo, but others were also shocked even if they didn't say it. The scene just now was enough to impress them. Didn't the shaman of the Rain Tribe say that he would be burned to death? Was he burned or not? Someone asked. Nonsense, that means he would be burned to death if he couldn't pray for rain. Such a heavy rain is all thanks to the shaman. I think the status of the Rain Tribe's shaman will be elevated. More than elevated. According to my understanding of the Rain Tribe, if the shaman really prays for rain successfully, he will definitely be the most powerful person in the tribe. No one will refute him, and his status will be higher than the chief. Indeed, now the people of the Rain Tribe simply regarded Yang Sui as a god. Even if Yang Sui asked them to kneel down and lick his toes, they would do it. Shao Xian checked the totem of the Rain Tribe in his sea of consciousness. The drop-shaped dots on the totem were still rolling, but compared with the heavy rain just now, the rolling speed was much slower. The weather soon became clear. The air was fresh after the rain, and the humid coolness had not yet dissipated. Most of the people of the Rain Tribe had smiles on their faces. It was probably the first successful prayer for rain in the tribe in recent years. The people of the Rain Tribe also sent some water and food to the travelers who rested at the border, which usually needed to be exchanged with a lot of things. But now, the people of the Rain Tribe were happy, and they were happy, so they wanted others to be happy with them. So they sent water and those flatbread. However, the people in the team were not very interested in these water and flatbread. Water? They had received enough. Flatbread? Who would like to eat that kind of dry and coarse flatbread that made one want to bite their teeth off? However, the experienced elders were happy to accept these flatbread and carefully put them into the animal skin bag. In the afternoon, Yang Sui came to Shao Xian. This time, he didn't send someone to inform him. Instead, he came personally. Now that the crisis was over and their position was stable, they didn't have to worry about bringing trouble to Xiao Xian. On the contrary, since Xiao Xian and Xiao Xian knew each other, the Rain tribesmen who were in charge of this area would give Xiao Xian more preferential treatment. Compared with the previous 2 days, Yang Sui had changed into clean and tidy clothes, and the embarrassment when he prayed for rain had disappeared. After only 1 day, Yang Sui looked much more mature. No one knew whether it was because of this incident or because of other reasons. In short, he looked like a dog and had quite the style. Yang Sui only had Miroa with him, and no one else. "Congratulations," Xiao Xian said. He took out the bag of shell coins and handed it to Yang Sui. "Take this back." "Take it." "I don't need it now," Yang Sui said. He didn't lie. Because of the promotion of his status, he really didn't need it. Although the Rain tribe looked poor, they had a lot of goods in their hands. As the person with the highest status in the tribe, Yang Sui had more. Compared with the wealth he had now, this bag of shells was really nothing. "What do I need it for? If we go back, I won't need it." If there was no accident, the travel team was likely to go to the desert. Xiao Xian didn't need these shell coins there. Even if he needed to call, he had some to trade. There was no need to take another bag of shell coins. Hearing Xiao Xian's words, Yang Sui thought of something and didn't object. He took the animal skin bag and handed it to Miroa. Then he whispered a few words to Miroa. Miroa hesitated for a moment, but nodded and left with the bag of shell coins. Seeing Miroa leave, Yang Sui said to Xiao Xian, "Wait a minute. I'll ask her to give you something. You'll definitely need it." "Are you going to the Death Land?" Yang Sui asked. Xiao Xian thought that the people here called the desert Death Land. He nodded and said, "Yes, we are going there. I've seen many people go there before. Some are travelers like you, and some are slaves. However, most of them go in, but few come out. I went there when I was young, and I almost didn't come out alive." Yang Sui shared his experience. After you go there, don't trust anyone easily. No matter the people in your team or the seemingly poor slaves, they may do anything to survive. What's more, in the Death Land, even if you see something, you have to be careful. Sometimes, the eyes can deceive people. Xiao Xian nodded in agreement. It was difficult to survive in the desert, which might stimulate some people's extreme thoughts. Naturally, they had to be careful. As for Yang Sui's last sentence, there might be a mirage in the desert. After talking about what he had seen and heard, Yang Sui became serious and bowed to Xiao Xian. "Xiao Xian, thank you." Seeing Xiao Xian's puzzled eyes, Yang Sui stood up and smiled. "I know it's you who helped me." When he prayed for rain, he felt that the fire seed showed signs of waking up. But it didn't take long for it to fall asleep again. At that time, he already knew that he had failed. But not long after that, the fire seed changed again and woke up again. He felt the power that made the fire seed wake up. That power came from the border of the Rain tribe, where the travelers lived. At that time, Yang Sui guessed that it might be because of Xiao Xian. As far as he knew, Xiao Xian had a strange power of inheritance. Now, after seeing Xiao Xian, Yang Sui was more sure. He could feel the power from Xiao Xian's body that awakened the fire seed. While they were talking, Miyu came over. She didn't walk, but rode a camel. It was the first time for Xiao Xian to see a camel in this world. It was a two-humped camel with a height of more than 2 meters. Its whole body was yellowish-brown, with short ears and a long tail. Most of its hair was not long. Although it was big, it looked thin and weak. Looking closely, the front of the camel's face was white, and its 2 short ears were also white. There were long dark brown hair on the front of its thick and curved neck and on its humps. There was also a tuft of hair on its forehead. When the wind blew, it would fly and shine. Xiao Xian observed the camel running over and thought, "It's a mythical beast of the desert. I think you will need it." Yang Sui looked at the camel trotting over and said to Xiao Xian, "They live in the dead land. It's not easy for us to catch them and bring them back to raise. Not many of them survive. The living ones are used by the tribesmen to carry things or eaten." When Yang Sui brought the camel to Xiao Xian, Miyu, who turned over from the camel, looked at it with reluctance. Moreover, this camel seemed to be very familiar with Yang Sui and Miyu. Xiao Xian could feel its closeness to the two. Yang Sui and Miyu must be reluctant to give this camel to him. If they went into the dead land, the chances of them coming out again would be small. What's more, these animals would be eaten as food when necessary. "And this, take it." Yang Sui handed Xiao Xian a heavy animal skin bag and a palm-sized black stone wrapped in leaves. Xiao Xian took the heavy animal skin bag and opened it. When he saw what was inside, his face twitched. "This is flatbread," Yang Sui said calmly. "Flatbread? Is this a discus?" Chapter 292. These pancakes were different from those that Xiao Xian and the others usually ate. They were sturdier, so sturdier that they could be used as discus to kill people. Xiao Xian broke off a piece from a pancake and felt the strength. Without the strength of a totem warrior, it would be very difficult to break off a piece from a thick pancake. Xiao Xian put a small piece into his mouth and chewed it. He felt that this kind of pancake should be labeled, "Do not eat those with bad teeth." "It's hard. But it's filling," Xiao Xian commented. "It's a must-have for us travelers in the remote areas. Different from trading with others, these pancakes are made by our tribe for our own people. Generally, we won't trade them. There is little food in the wasteland. With these, you can at least survive temporarily." Yang Sui handed a black stone wrapped in tree bark to Xiao Xian. "You can use this too." "What is this?" Xiao Xian felt the coolness on the black stone and guessed, "Rain stone." This is indeed a rain stone, but it's not an ordinary one. You can only find a small one like this in 1,000 rain stones. We call it the spiritual rain stone. It's a gift from the gods. It can help people in the tribe survive the driest season. Xiao Xian touched the surface of this small black stone. Just for a while, the part that touched the leaves had a layer of moist mist. But the part that didn't touch the leaves evaporated even if it formed a layer of mist. It was indeed a magical tool for water production in arid areas. "Thank you." Xiao Xian didn't refuse Yang Sui's kindness. He wrapped the small stone with leaves again and put it in a clean animal skin bag. "Don't thank me. If it weren't for you, I would have been burned to death." Yang Sui paused and said, "If you meet a slave owner in the wasteland, don't fight with them. Try to avoid them." "How much do you know about slave owners?" Xiao Xian asked. The people of the Rain tribe who lived here should know more about slaves and slave owners. Slave owners? Yang Sui's eyes flashed with a hint of fear. Slave owners are a group of people without any fire. In the eyes of the tribesmen, without a fire seed, it meant that they could not form a tribe. Without a tribe, they were naturally wanderers with weak combat power. However, the slave owners were different. They didn't have a fire seed, but they had great power. They could even create more powerful slaves. Where does their power come from? Xiao Xian was puzzled. "I don't know." Yang Sui shook his head. "Maybe that's the reason why people from the central region go there again and again." In the records of the ancestors of the Rain tribe, it was mentioned that the slave owners had the ability to make the people in the central region fear them. 1,000 years ago, they appeared and stirred up a storm. Many tribes were wiped out because of this. After that, they all entered the land of death. Because of this, many people were extremely puzzled. There were also people who entered the land of death in order to find the answer. However, it was always the case that more people went in than came out. Some became slaves, and some died. Only you people from the central region often go there. If you see something shocking, come back and tell me. Yang Sui said with a smile. Okay. After talking with Xiao Xian for a while, Yang Sui and Mi Su left. Some people of the Rain tribe were looking for Yang Sui. The shaman had many things to deal with, but Yang Sui asked them to wait first, so they gathered not far away and waited obediently. Looking at the respectful appearance of those people waiting in the Rain tribe in front of Yang Sui, at least in recent years, Yang Sui's status was stable. Xiao Xian carried the disc-like flatbread and the rain stone. He looked at the camel with a face like a mythical beast. Mi Su said it was called mud. In the Rain tribe, mud was not a bad word, just like mud, which was a lucky word. What was mud? Soil and water. For the Rain tribe, which lacked water, it would be good if the soil was like mud instead of dry and cracked hard blocks. Let's go, mud. Xiao Xian led the camel to the wooden house where they rested and tied it at the door of the house. Lei and Tua thought that Xiao Xian brought the camel as a spare food in the future, so they looked at the camel with shining eyes. Hey, with that kind of thing, we will be slowed down. It's better to eat it now. A man of the Tianshan tribe said. What he got in response was a long puff from the camel's trembling lips. Huang Yi and others were no strangers to camels. They did not express any other opinions about Xiao Xian taking the camel. They only asked Xiao Xian to pay attention and not fall behind. The next day, the traveling team left the Rain tribe and headed for the desert. As Xiao Xian expected, the further they went, the more serious the desertification was. At first, there were some trees and grass, but slowly, there was only sand left. The sun was high in the sky, and the sand on the ground was hot. The group hurried on. Huang Yi said that before tonight, they had to get to a place to rest, where it would be safer. Until now, no one had fallen behind. Those who could follow were selected, and those who could not meet the requirements would not drag the team down. Even if some of these people could not keep up, the elders would let them go back by themselves. The team would not delay the progress because of a small number of people. Xiao Xian looked at the camel called Mud that had been following him. On its body, it carried several animal skin bags with food and stone tools, as well as several pieces of animal skin. However, it still followed the team closely and did not fall behind. Xiao Xian and the other two were much more relaxed. Although they could carry it themselves, and the weight was nothing, it could reduce some of the load and they could better maintain their physical strength. Coming to such a dry land for the first time, Lei and Tua were somewhat unaccustomed to it, so it was easier to reduce the load. Other people who came here for the first time were also unaccustomed to it, but they did not have a camel to help them carry it. At first, they were cynical, but now after running for a while, they glanced over there with envy and jealousy. In order to resist the strong Yangguang, the camel's brow bone was very high. In order to resist the wind and sand, the camel's eyelashes were also long. When this fellow raised its neck and looked down at people, tut, that noble and indifferent look was funny. In the sky, the 5 eagles had been following. Sometimes they saw some movement in the desert and rushed to fight for food. When it was close to dark, the team finally arrived at the resting place that Huang Yi said. It looked like an abandoned village. The walls were surrounded by sand and stone, and there were dried wooden stakes. Broken pottery shards and stone tools that were half buried could be seen everywhere. Xiao Xian and the others were not the only people who arrived there. Before them, there was a team that looked like slaves, but it was very different from the slave team they met when they came. These people were not bound. It's the sand slaves. Someone next to him said. Sand slaves were the tribal people's name for slaves born in the desert. These people, their ancestors were already slaves, and they did not know which generation of slaves they were. These people were different from the new slaves. They did not need to be bound and would not run away. Xiao Xian looked at them. These people were not much different from the tribal people in terms of appearance, but they were thin and had dark skin, which was one of the physical characteristics common to most desert residents. Perhaps it was because of the strong sunlight, excessive exposure to the sun, and the harsh desert climate with frequent sandstorms, as well as the fact that they often sat by the fire to warm themselves, their skin lost its elasticity and became wrinkled, stiff, rough, and cracked. Their teeth were yellow, their feet were bare, they did not wear any protective footwear, and their feet were larger than the average person. When they looked at Xiao Xian and others, their eyes were curious and guarded, and when they saw what the people in the team were carrying, the look in these people's eyes was greedy and murderous. Chapter 293. There was no need for others to say more. Looking at the eyes of these sand slaves, the others knew what to do. This was indeed a good place to rest, but when resting, they could not take it lightly. The first thing to guard against was these sand slaves. There were only some walls of different heights and there was no roof. The blowing wind was dry and dusty. As the sky gradually darkened, the surrounding temperature also plummeted. Even the 3 people of the Yanjiao tribe, who had adapted to the cold winter, felt goosebumps all over their bodies. They were not cold, but they always felt a sense of chill. "Let's eat something first, and then we will take turns to watch the night," Xiao Xian said. A piece of cake was broken, and the 3 people shared it with a little dried meat and water. The other people in the team also ate in a similar way. The people of each tribe gathered together. At this time, the people of their own tribe were naturally much more reliable. Xiao Xian looked at the camel that followed him. This guy was very smart. He knew to follow Xiao Xian and avoid other people, especially the sand slaves. At this time, it was chewing a plant that looked like a dead tree root growing in the corner, eating with relish. The eyes of those sand slaves swept around the people in the team, and then stopped at Mud, who was chewing, with greed in their eyes. The sand slave closest to Mud finally could not help it. Sand slave, who had dark skin, seemed to be covered with a layer of protection in the night. He held a sharpened bone spur and rushed out like a predator in the night. Although his ultimate goal was the camel, the first thing he had to deal with was Xiao Xian next to the camel. There were no other unnecessary movements, everything was only the pursuit of speed. Accurate. Ruthless. Enough to kill with one blow. If Xiao Xian were to be pierced by the bone spur, his chest would be pierced through. No matter how strong a totem warrior was, he would not be able to escape the fate of being pierced to death. There was no fire on Xiao Xian's side. Under the moonlight, Xiao Xian saw the serrated patterns on the sand slave's body, which was different from the slaves he had seen before. When he saw Xiao Xian, the slaves over there had chain-like patterns, not serrated. So, these slaves belonged to different slave owners? Sand slave's eyes reflected the cold moonlight, with a hint of bloodthirsty excitement, as if he wanted to immediately hook a piece of meat from the other side. Perhaps he thought that he would be able to get rid of these extra people very quickly and then monopolize the camel. Puff! The sound of his body being penetrated was particularly clear at this moment. The expression on Sha Nu's face froze. Not only did he fail to stab his target, but he also suffered a sudden sharp pain. The stone saber had a powerful penetrating force, like a fierce beast, and fiercely pierced into Sha Nu's body, and then easily sent him flying. Bang! Sha Nu, who was sent flying, fell to the ground and lost his breath. Xiao Xian waved the stone saber in his hand, shook off the blood on his body, inserted it into the sand in front of him, and then looked up at the group of sand slaves over there. Several sand slaves saw the people who did not get up after falling to the ground. There were no expressions of surprise or fear on their faces, just curiosity and sizing them up. It seemed that they were re-evaluating Xiao Xian's fighting power and the threat of this team. Among the group of sand slaves, there were several strong people. They were not as thin as other sand slaves. No other sand slaves approached within 2 steps of them. They glanced at Huang Yi and others, and then continued to do their own things. They skewered an unknown creature on the bone saber and roasted it on the fire. Because there was limited firewood in this place, the fire that could be ignited was not big, and the fire was also limited. Some of the meat was not roasted, but they still ate it. When they bit, they also brought out some animal viscera and blood. That should be a higher-level slave, right? Tuo asked Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian nodded. You sleep first, Lei, and I will keep watch. Because of such a disadvantageous situation, Xiao Xian decided that 2 people would keep watch at night, 1 person would sleep, and then take turns to rest. 2 people were safer than 1 person. The threat of these slaves was too great. No wonder the people in the tribe were so afraid of slaves. They didn't take the lives of their companions seriously, so they didn't have to worry too much. Xiao Xian went to the sand wall and sat down. Some sand was piled up at the foot of the wall. Xiao Xian stabbed it with the stone saber and found something. The tip of the saber lifted some sand, and Xiao Xian saw a white bone. The first thing that was exposed was the skull. The evening wind blew the sand away, and more parts of the skull were exposed. Xiao Xian looked at the crack on the skull, which seemed to be caused by a sharp weapon. It was not that Xiao Xian had stabbed it with a saber. The crack on the skull had been there for a long time. Looking carefully at the wound on the skull, Xiao Xian picked up the skull and gave it to Lei. Look. Lei was staring at the sand slaves fiercely. Compared to those sand slaves, whose eyes were more ruthless, he heard Xiao Xian's words. He retracted his gaze and took the skull. He was not afraid of these, and directly took it in his hand and looked at it carefully. Lei had followed the hunters since he was a child. He was very familiar with the wounds caused by the beasts. He could distinguish which ones were man-made and which ones were injured by other beasts. Seeing the long crack on the skull, Lei's eyes flashed, and his vigilance became stronger. He no longer paid all his attention to the sand slaves, but divided a part of his attention to the surroundings. Compared with other people in the team, the people of Yanjiao knew the least about this desert. After all, they had no elders to tell them the details, so they could only judge based on their own experience. Don't expect the people of other tribes in the team to tell you much. At this time, they must first take care of their own tribe, and will not pay attention to Xiao Xian, let alone talk about other things. The wound on the skull was caused by a beast's claw, which was very fast and sharp. Maybe the beast that killed the man was not big, but it could make fast and fierce attacks, so it must be guarded against. From the bone of the skull, it could be seen that the strength of the deceased was at least at the level of a junior totem warrior, maybe even higher. In any case, they had to be more careful. Because Chu Su and others were curious, Xiao Xian threw the skull to them and let them see more. Xiao Xian and the other 2 took turns to watch the night, and the others did the same. The sand slaves also attacked them, but it was more like a test. They tested one by one, and then picked the worst attack. Because there was no more firewood added to the fire, it soon went out, and only the moonlight cast in the sky was left. Some tribes in warm areas were wrapped in 2 layers of animal skins at this time, because they were not used to such cold. Huang Yi and several elders looked at the people in the team, and finally their eyes fell on the 3 people of the Yanjiao tribe. As warriors who participated in this kind of long journey for the first time, the 3 people of the Yanjiao tribe were the fastest to adapt. At night, they tested and fought again and again. Every once in a while, there was always a sound. Maybe it was the sound of weapons clashing, or the sound of being chopped and fought. There was more and more blood around, and some insects living under the sand were attracted by the blood. They crawled out and sucked the flesh and blood in the sand. If they were not full, they would target other creatures. Xiao Xian could always hear the sound of the camel's hooves stepping on the ground. When he looked over, several insects had been trampled to death by the camel's feet. Then, the camel ate all these insects. Xiao Xian didn't know if other camels were like this, but this one didn't seem to avoid meat and vegetables. This was also good, because it was easy to raise. The next day, when the sun came out, the sand slaves had left, and the dead sand slaves were left behind. Not long after, they became white bones again. Chapter 294. What came into view was a sea of sand. The sand dunes formed by the wind stretched into the distance. Looking up, there was no vegetation. The exposed rocks of different sizes formed a variety of strange shapes under the erosion of the wind and sand. Xiao Xian looked at the rock above his head that looked like the big head and slender neck of an ET alien. He had a feeling that the rock would not be able to withstand the wind and collapse. After half a day of trekking, the team rested here, and they could use these rocks to shelter the hot Yangguang. At this time, if an egg was hid on the ground, it would be cooked immediately. Where did the man from the Mang tribe say we were going? Tua asked. Luoya City. Xiao Xian said, it's the territory of the slave owners. 2 days after entering the desert, Huang Yi told Xiao Xian where the destination of this trip was. Before, Xiao Xian had asked many times but failed to get an answer, only a "you'll know when the time comes." And on the way, Xiao Xian and the other two could clearly feel the rejection of other people. It seemed that this time they were just taking them through the motions, and they were not arranged in the plan. In particular, the people of the Tianshan tribe were not only on guard against Xiao Xian and the other two, but also with obvious hostility. They often pointed their arrows at Xiao Xian and the other two, and the two sides almost fought several times. The people of other tribes would have elders to inform them of the relevant information. Only the 3 people of Yanjiao did not say much to them. Even Chu Su and others, who usually talked with the 3 people more often, wanted to say something but stopped many times. They did not dare to talk nonsense. Now, they were finally told that they were going to a place called Luoya City that belonged to a slave owner. As for the person who had kept his mouth shut previously, he was now able to reveal more and speak more casually. Some people in the team seemed to be superior when facing the 3 people of Yanjiao, probably like urban intellectuals looking at the country bumpkins. The concept of city was quite strange to the people of Yanjiao. In their knowledge, they only knew the concept of the tribe. As for city, it was vague. If there was no explanation from Xiao Xian, Lei and Tua would still be confused. A city? I really want to see if it's bigger than a tribe. By the way, Xian, who do they think is the biggest person in the city? Chief? Ray asked. No, I heard it was the Lord, said Tua. Master is called that by slaves. Others are not. Ray corrected. It's king. In the city, the highest ruler calls himself king, Xiao Xian said. From Xiao Xian's understanding of the situation, there were many slave owners in this desert, with their subordinates entrenched everywhere. The place where each slave owner lived was called a city, not the tribe that the tribesmen were familiar with. It was reasonable to say that the slave owners and the tribesmen could not coexist peacefully, but there were always a few special places that existed. Luoya City was one of the most special cities in the desert. In the past, the king of Luoya City was also a slave owner who hated the tribes very much. Generation after generation, the ruler of Luoya City was changing, and so was the style of Luoya City. The biggest change happened 20 years ago. The former Luoya City king, because of his lustful nature, snatched a lot of beautiful female slaves and gave birth to a bunch of sons and daughters. Originally, under normal circumstances, only the descendants of slave owners could inherit the powerful abilities of their parents. Because of this, many slave owners did not take the descendants of those slaves seriously. They directly threw them into the slave trade and raised them as slaves. Until 20 years ago, there was a strong counterattack. The father of the counterattack was a slave owner, and the mother was just a low-level slave with no ability. But it was such a person who fully inherited his father's ability and talent. After adulthood, he was even stronger than his father. Later, the counterattack not only killed his slave owner father, but also the slave owner queen, along with his half-brother who was about to inherit the throne. The counterattack, who shocked many jaws, was now the highest ruler of Luoya City, the largest slave owner of Luoya City, and became the Luoya City king. When they heard this, Lei and Tua were very puzzled. Probably this was not in line with their 3 views. In the Flaming Horns tribe, even if it was a competition, it could not be fought in such a bad way, let alone brothers who were related by blood. However, after all, that was other people's family business. Besides, their chief did not find so many people to have a large number of descendants. The shaman was watching. The Luoya city king should be the best slave owner for the tribes, right? Otherwise, it would be impossible to let the tribes enter the city. Tuo said. Then we have to go into the city and see. Xiao Xian said. He did not think that the Luoya city king, who cut his father and all his brothers and sisters, would look at the tribes differently. The most likely was that he used the tribes to fight against other slave owners. After all, a counterattack that shocked countless jaws, the price to pay must be quite high. Let's go, set off for Luoya city. Lei looked at the people who got up and said. After the team set off again, they walked for another 2 days. Sometimes they could not find a suitable place to rest, so they went directly into the desert. They also encountered some desert beasts that came out at night. 4 people were lost in the team, dragged under the sand, and could no longer be found. On the 5th day of walking into the desert, the team continued to move forward under the sun. Compared with the travel teams that Xiao Xian had seen, this team was the most abused. The hot and dry air waves swept over the boundless desert. The wind was blowing, and the wind was whirling. The sand was blown into a dune. Not far away, on a tall hill that looked like a mountain, some grains of sand were blown up and blew over the ridge. The main body of such a tall dune had existed for many years. It may be hundreds of years, thousands of years, or even longer. Look, there's someone over there. It was not only someone who shouted. Looking sideways, there was a tall hill in the distance. On the ridge, there was a group of people walking on a camel. Who is that? Which city's slaves? I can't see clearly. I don't know which city they are from, but looking at the direction they are going, they should be from Luoya city, right? Someone said. Don't worry about it. Keep going, we're almost there, an elder said. When encountering slaves, as long as those slaves did not take the initiative to look for trouble, the travel team would not attack them at will. They had to save their strength to hurry on the road and did not want to spend more effort to deal with those slaves. As they continued to move forward, Xiao Xian found that the team was going in the same direction as them, and the camel he was leading began to get excited. Did they see the same kind? Xiao Xian pulled the somewhat excited camel and did not let it rush forward. There seemed to be some other smells in the air, floating with the wind. The camel next to him was even more excited, and it seemed to want to run over. Not in the direction of the team, but directly ahead. Luoya city. Lei also smelled other smells in the air. Because they often hunted, they were very sensitive to the changes in the surrounding smells. In addition to the changes in smells, there were also some sounds. After another hill, Xiao Xian saw the destination of their trip, Luoya city. At this time, the sun was already slanting towards the horizon. The orange sunset shone on the vast desert, and looking ahead, there were large tracts of leaves with the same color as the sunset. The orange trees, the orange sunset, and the desert city that was dyed by the setting sun. It is said that the most common tree in Luoya city is the sunset tree. Because the color of the leaves is similar to the sunset, it never changes color all year round, so it was named. Even the symbol of Luoya city is the deciduous tree. It is said that deciduous trees live for thousands of years without dying, thousands of years without falling, and thousands of years without falling. It's just hearsay, no one knows the truth. However, looking around, there are indeed large tracts of sunset trees in Luoya city, and seeing these trees makes people feel cool. After walking in the desert for so many days, in addition to sand and stones, now it is rare to see so many plants, and their mood is a lot better. In addition to those sunset trees, there are some unknown grasses around the city. Although not much, they do exist. No wonder the camel next to them was so excited, it was aware of food. Standing on the sand dune and looking at Luoya city, in addition to the conspicuous trees with the same color as the sunset, there is also a tall building. Below the building are huge stones like a pyramid, and above it is a house built. The highest place in Luoya city is where the king lives. An elder of the Hui tribe said. Chapter 295. At the highest point was the king's palace. It was indeed a place where one could overlook the whole city. I heard that a lot of slaves died in order to build that high place. Someone sighed. This was the difference between a tribe and a slave owner. In the tribe, few people would deliberately build such a place. At most, they would build the house on a high place, such as a tree or a mountain, and would not spend a lot of manpower and material resources to build a high palace. Let's go, we can rest in the city tonight, Huang Yi said. Other people rarely raised their spirits, and they were very curious about the city where the slave owners lived. Around Luoya city, the walls were built with sand, with an average height of about 10 meters, which looked very old. There were some people around the walls, these were all slaves. In the territory of the slave owners, slaves accounted for the majority. The dark-skinned and cracked slaves looked at the people coming over, holding sharpened spears in their hands, and shouted something loudly. Xiao Xian didn't understand their words, but someone in the team understood. He replied and then threw a palm-sized thing over. That should be some kind of proof. Sure enough, after seeing that thing, the slaves guarding the gate stepped aside, and the huge wooden door opened with a click. Xiao Xian and the other two followed the team in. As for Cha-Cha, it followed the two eagles of the Hui tribe. It was not their first time here, so they knew where to go. In the city, some sand houses could be seen everywhere, and they were densely packed. Those were not big and irregular in shape. They were more like nests than houses, which looked like they would collapse at any time. This was where the lowly slaves lived. As they continued to walk forward, they could see some bigger houses made of stone. In the corner of Luoya city, there was a place where there were not many slave activities, and the people who lived there were mostly tribesmen. Xiao Xian, like others, thought that there was an absolute contradiction between the tribes and the slave owners before coming here, but this was not the case. Tribes would show different attitudes towards different slave owners, and the king of Luoya city was like a cooperative relationship with the tribes. There were some places that resembled embassies here. Other than the people in the team, there were also some tribesmen stationed here. They had probably lived here for a long time, so their skin was a lot darker. If you ignored their tribal clothing, they didn't look much different from the people in the city. The other tribes had special resting places in Luoya city, but the Yanjiao trio, who came here for the first time, were in an awkward situation. Because there was no special embassy, the three of them could only be arranged to stay in some small sand huts. These huts were previously used to store sundries, but they were temporarily vacated for the three of them. When they entered the huts, they could smell a rotten smell. In the eyes of the others, the three people from the Yanjiao tribe were just there to go through the motions. They wouldn't be informed of any plans or activities. Xiao Xian and the other two were already aware of this feeling of rejection. However, they didn't know how long they would have to stay in such a place. The three of them were unhappy. Ray pushed the stone wall beside him and said contemptuously, "Not strong enough. Let's stay here for the night first. Tomorrow, we'll look for stones to build a house." Xiao Xian said. Since they knew that the tribes could have a station here, the Yanjiao tribe certainly had to build one here. Even if it wasn't for the three of them, they had to provide benefits for the Yanjiao people who came later. They didn't want to live in such a broken house when they came. Although the house was bad, it was much better than sleeping in the desert a few days ago. The three of them rested in the house for a night, and when they woke up the next day, their spirits were much better. The camel was tied outside the house by Xiao Xian. In the morning, Xiao Xian fed it some water. The surrounding grass had been eaten by it, so Xiao Xian would have to find something for it to eat. Tuo looked at the luggage and camel in the house and took the time to ask the other tribes. It was best to know where there were more stones near Luoya city. Ray followed Xiao Xian and went to other places in Luoya city to see, at least to know the general situation in the city. Leaving the place where the tribes lived, Xiao Xian found that in Luoya City, many people did not wear animal skins, but mostly linen. The temperature was high during the day, so many people simply wrapped a few pieces of linen. Xiao Xian and the other two were told that in Luoya City, it was best to avoid the slave owners. In a city, there was more than one slave owner, but there was only one big slave owner, and that was the king. Other slave owners did not have many slaves under their hands, but in the city, their status was higher than the slaves. No matter how high it could not be higher than the king of the city. There were also trading places here, but Xiao Xian found that the language and writing here was another set. It was not the same as the tribal language and was more complicated. Xiao Xian intended to use the shell coins in his hand to buy some food. When he could not find prey, he would temporarily eat food. Here, shell coins and many other popular trading items in the tribes could be used here, but they were seriously devalued. After all, in the slave owner's place, as long as the slave owner lived well, the requirements of the slaves did not matter. The slave owners of Luoya City liked beautiful cloth and jade, and naturally, cloth and jade were expensive. Perhaps this was the main reason why the Mang tribe and the Eight Limbs tribe had the best living conditions here. Among all the tribal embassies, the 2 embassies were the largest. In the place where food was sold, the people in charge were also slaves. The slaves engaged in this kind of work did not seem to be aggressive, and they also understood the tribal language. It was just that when Xiao Xian took out the shell coins, their eyes were contemptuous, and they said a few words in a language that Xiao Xian did not understand. It was not a good thing to look at, and Ray was so angry that he almost hit him. You said that you are a slave. What qualifications do you have to look down on people? However, in the territory of the slave owners, these slaves could really throw the tribe's face. After all, this was the place of the slave owners. For the slaves, here, the slave owners were the first, and the slaves were the second, and the tribe's people were ranked behind the 2. After buying food, Xiao Xian did not walk a few steps, and he heard a noise not far away. What is that? Ray looked over there and asked. Slave owners. Over there, 4 dark and strong slaves were carrying a simple wooden sedan. The sedan was not closed around it, and there was no roof on top. Instead, it was covered with a piece of cloth of different colors. When the wind blew, the cloth swayed, and the people sitting inside could be seen through the gaps of the cloth. The person being carried was a woman, and her specific age could not be seen. Anyway, she was not young. Her face was painted with various colors of paint, and the original appearance could not be seen. The people carrying the sedan stopped all the way, and sometimes they stopped at the place where wine was sold. The person on the sedan directly reached out her hand, and someone would hold a colored pottery cup with fruit wine and offer it. From time to time, someone would hand over a fruit, a piece of barbecue, or a stone bracelet. The person on the sedan did not need to pay anything in exchange. All she needed to do was to reach out her hand. This was the absolute class. The life of the slave owners is really good. Ray said with emotion. Remembering the warnings of the other people in the team, Xiao Xian saw the person being carried coming over here, and quickly left with Ray. In the territory of the slave owners, they could not reason with them. Right and wrong were defined by them. Chapter 296. After walking around outside, Xiao Xian got limited information, but the status of the slave owners here gave Xiao Xian and Lei some idea. In this city, the slave owners were the masters, and right and wrong were defined by them. What bothered Xiao Xian was the words and language of the slave owners. His understanding of the language used by the slave owners was limited to the words engraved on the slaves, because those words also appeared in tribal communication. Xiao Xian had seen them in other travel teams before, so he knew them. But here, it was difficult. Xiao Xian's side was not going well, and Tua, who stayed in the broken house, did not get good news either. Can't act at will? After hearing Tuo's words, Xiao Xian began to think about what to do next. According to Tuo, the people of the surrounding tribes told him that whether it was inside or outside the city, if there was no specific permission and pass token, it was easy to be regarded as an enemy and attacked. The so-called special permission should be the kind of token that the team showed when entering the city, but Xiao Xian did not have it now. That kind of token was not easy to get. The other people who had been here for many years only had 1 or 2 tokens. They would not be so generous as to share it with Xiao Xian and the other 2. After all, they did not have enough for themselves. Unable to travel at will, finding stones to build a house had to be put aside for the time being. Let's put aside the matter of building a house first. I'll go find someone. After resting in the house for a while, Xiao Xian went to the Mang tribe to find Huang Yi, but the people of the Mang tribe seemed to be discussing something today. Huang Yi had no time, so Xiao Xian went to the Hui tribe and saw Cha Cha, who was staying with the 2 eagles of the Hui tribe. The people of the Hui tribe were there. Xiao Xian shamelessly asked for advice from an elder named He Shi. This elder had also helped Xiao Xian on this trip. Although he didn't help much, his attitude was there. Xiao Xian did not look for the token they wanted to pass through, but asked He Shi if there was anyone who was proficient in the language and writing of the slave owners. He could pay some compensation in exchange. The Hui tribe had several people who stayed here for a long time. They had been here for more than 10 years. Now they had nothing to do, so they could help Xiao Xian. By the way, can you tell me something about the slave owners in Luoya City? Today I met a female slave owner outside. Xiao Xian talked about today's things, hoping to get some information from He Shi. If Xiao Xian didn't ask, He Shi wouldn't have taken the initiative to tell him. However, since Xiao Xian asked, he didn't hide anything. He couldn't say much about other things, but this was fine. When he was in the tribe, He Shi heard Gula mention Xiao Xian and the eagle named Cha Cha. After seeing it, He Shi's impression of Xiao Xian was also good. He Shi was more calm and did not say too much nonsense. A few simple words could let Xiao Xian have a general understanding of the slave owners in the city. The big slave owner of Luoya City, the Luoya City King, was called Su Luan. Since Su Luan's counterattack 20 years ago, the slave owners in the city had been reduced a lot. Now, the few slave owners who were still alive and had relatively high status, in addition to Su Luan's 2 half-sisters, were his 3 sons. Originally, there were 5 sons, but 2 of them did not survive for various reasons. Now there were only 3 left, the eldest young master Su Ka, the second young master Su Lu, and the third young master Su Gu. They were born to different women. In the past 2 years, the competition between the 3 young masters of Luoya City had become more and more fierce. Although the Luoya City King had cooperation with the tribes, he often did not care much about the affairs of the tribes. Therefore, many of the small things in his eyes, he directly adopted an indifferent attitude. On the contrary, the several young masters could help a lot. Of course, there was also a mutually beneficial relationship. The people of the tribes could get some convenience and news from the young masters of Luoya City to deal with their own tribal matters. At the same time, they could also give some credit to the young masters of Luoya City, so that they could gain more advantages in the competition and fully brush their presence in the Luoya City King. The Hui tribe has a deal with the second young master Su Lu? Xiao Xian said. Just now, when He Shi mentioned the 3 young masters, there was a pause at the second young master Su Lu. He Shi looked at Xiao Xian and did not refute. The people of the tribes used the slaves of other cities as whetstones. They hoped that in this way, they could train the young warriors with potential in their tribes. Only in constant battles could they become more and more courageous. At the same time, it also made them vigilant and defensive against the slave owners. The so-called know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. If they only stayed in the tribe, it would be too comfortable, and their vision would be too narrow. Just like many warriors who had not really come into contact with slaves, they always thought that slaves were some low-class people who could be cut down at will. But in fact, this was not the case. Xiao Xian wanted to ask which young master the other tribes had a deal with, but she did not answer this question. Seeing that Xiao Xian seemed to be interested in this, she reminded him, if you want to make a deal with the young masters of Luoya City, it is best to choose the eldest young master Su Ka and the second young master Su Lo, the youngest one. What about the youngest one? Xiao Xian asked. The youngest one, it is said that until now, he has no slaves of his own. The more slaves there were, the more wealth and strength the slave owner had. This was a direct indication of that. Slave owners had the ability to enslave, to give power to those who had no faith and then enslave them. Until now, not having a slave of his own was quite a failure for a slave owner. The three young masters of Luoya City did not have a big age difference. However, from the slaves they owned, it was easy to see the advantages and disadvantages. Did anyone choose the youngest one? Xiao Xian asked again. No. Xiao Xian nodded. I understand, thank you. In the next few days, Xiao Xian went back and forth to the Hui tribe's stronghold every day, learning the language of the slave owners from the Hui tribe's warriors. The language and writing of the slave owners was not too difficult or complicated. Xiao Xian's memory was good and he learned quickly. 3 days later, Xiao Xian had learned almost everything. In his hand, he also had an animal skin roll with the words used by the slave owners. He would go back and consolidate it. Usually, he would walk on the street and listen more. He believed that it would not take long for him to become proficient. On this day, Xiao Xian, who had been in the house for a few days because of learning the language of the slave owners, took Tua out for a walk. This time, Lei stayed in the house. Although the things on the streets of Luoya City could only be called simple and crude, it was not as lively as the markets between the tribes. However, some of them were quite novel, such as some animals, herbs, ornaments, and so on. It was just bad luck today that he saw the female slave owner who was being carried again. According to what she told Xiao Xian, this should be one of the 2 half-sisters of the current Luoya City king. As the only 2 surviving siblings, there must be a reason for them to survive. Xiao Xian speculated based on the information he learned that these 2 were either very smart or very brainless. In any case, Xiao Xian did not intend to deal with these slave owners now. He had not decided which young master of Luoya City to look for. There were only 3 people from Yanjiao, and they were not famous here. He did not know if the cooperation would be smooth. Just as Xiao Xian and Tua were about to leave, there was a shout from the other side. It was the voice of the female slave owner coming from the wooden palanquin. Xiao Xian pretended not to understand and did not pay attention to it. Who would have thought that before they could leave, the slaves in front of them had already blocked the way? Stop. This time, the slave owner used the tribal language, but it sounded a bit awkward. Tua looked at Xiao Xian, his hand already holding the hilt of his sword. Xiao Xian signaled him to be calm and turned to look at the female slave owner who was being carried here. Who are you? A hand wearing a variety of ornaments lifted the cloth covering the front of the wooden palanquin, revealing the face that could not be seen. The voice was arrogant. Yanjiao tribe, Xiao Xian replied. Oh. Yanjiao tribe? Never heard of it. The voice said slowly, but it doesn't matter. It must not be a big tribe. Would you like to follow me? The words had a sense of charity, as if being her slave was a very honorable thing. Following a slave owner meant being a slave, not a cooperation. Tuo's eyes flashed with anger. He was about to draw his sword, but was blocked by Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian looked at the person on the wooden palanquin, not interested. The hand on the wooden palanquin loosened, and the opened cloth was closed again. A soft humph came from inside. Beside the wooden palanquin, a tall and sturdy man strode forward with a large stone hammer in his hand. Every step he took caused the ground to tremble, and the sand and stones on the ground were sent flying, leaving behind deep footprints. Looking at the word on his face, he was a servant slave. Not letting Tua move, Xiao Xian took 2 steps forward. When the other party swung his arm down, he dodged sideways. His hand stretched out, directly grabbing the handle of the long stone hammer in the other party's hand, and then his wrists fiercely pulled. The slave holding the handle of the hammer suddenly felt as if his hands were being grilled in a hot desert. He wanted to grab the handle of the hammer, but he could not resist this greater force. Although he clenched it tightly, the handle of the hammer was still dragged out of his hand. Ka! Under this moment of tyrannical force, the slave's arms were abruptly dislocated. Pung! The slave who had lost his stone hammer was kicked away by Xiao Xian. He flew out more than 10 meters before landing on the ground. He wanted to get up, but the pain all over his body made him sweat like beans. He couldn't get up for a while. The people who had been standing outside the crowd saw this scene. Their pupils shrank, and then they flashed with joy. When the person on the wooden palanquin was about to call out more people, he shouted, "Stop!" Hearing this voice, the people who were still around just now shuddered away. One by one, they bowed their heads and said, "Young master." The people who were ready to fight also put away their ferocious momentum. One by one, they became like quails in an instant. When did Luoya city force the tribesmen to be slaves? The person came over and said righteously. Xiao Xian heard this and his mouth twitched. "You've been watching from the side for so long, and now you jump out. Who are you trying to scare?" Chapter 297. The person who came looked to be 14 or 15 years old, not as dark as the other slaves. He wore clean cloth clothes and also had a lot of ornaments. There were bright gems and some bone ornaments. In Luoya city, it was a luxurious type. As long as one was not blind, they could see that this was a slave owner in the city. The slaves around him called him a young master. Xiao Xian thought about the information of the 3 slave owners' young masters in the city. The most likely one was the youngest third young master, Su Gu. It was said that until now, he had not been able to own a slave as a waste. The other tribes did not choose to make a deal with him. No matter how much of a waste he was still a young master in the city, and the slaves had to respect him. At this time, the third young master, who thought that he made a dazzling appearance, raised his chin and swept his eyes around with a disdainful attitude. Seeing that everyone was showing respect, his eyes showed satisfaction, and then looked at the wooden sedan. After the third young master came out, the person on the wooden sedan was like a mute. He did not speak, and the momentum of the people carrying the sedan also weakened a bit. He believed that the person on the wooden sedan was the same. It was the same humph, but this time it was not as strong as before. It seemed a little guilty. "Go." The person on the wooden sedan threw out a colored pottery wine cup, venting his anger. The colored pottery wine cup fell to the ground and immediately shattered. Xiao Xian looked at it. The colored pottery wine cup was exquisitely made. The wall of the cup was very thin, and the pattern on the cup was very complex. If it was taken to the tribe who loved pottery, it would certainly be a treasure. But here, it was casually used as an object to vent. The slaves worked hard to make things, but for the slave owners, it was just a casual thing. After the wooden sedan disappeared, the people around also dispersed. Su Gu's eyes swept over Xiao Xian and Tuo, as if looking at goods. It was estimated that he himself did not know how much his eyes were asking for a beating. However, he still thought that his attitude was kind, showing a smile to Xiao Xian and Tuo. Xiao Xian, Tuo. They wanted to beat him even more. "Which tribe are you from? I haven't seen you in the city before." "My name is Su Gu, the third young master of Luoya city." Su Gu came over and pretended to be curious. "Yanjiao tribe, Xiao Xian, Tuo." Xiao Xian introduced. "Yanjiao. Looking at your strength, your tribe is definitely not weak." Su Gu said. "It's not up to me to say whether he's strong or not," Xiao Xian said. "Is this your first time here?" "Yes." "What are your plans?" "I'm just a bystander." "Who is soy sauce?" After asking a few more questions, Su Gu couldn't get what he wanted to know from Xiao Xian. Instead, he panicked. Finally, he couldn't help but cough and say, "Actually, you new tribesmen don't have a pass token. It's really inconvenient." Xiao Xian and Tuo glanced at him without saying anything. After waiting for a while, Su Gu said, "I can get you a token." After that, he smiled at Xiao Xian and Tuo. Xiao Xian and Tuo glanced at him again, still not speaking. Xiao Xian told Tuo Lele about the information he had heard. Therefore, Tuo also knew that the one in front of him was the most useless of the three contenders for the throne. No tribe was willing to trade with him. In Tuo's view, such a weak person was indeed not necessary to trade cooperation. However, here, everything was decided by Xiao Xian. At this time, he would not talk nonsense. Seeing Xiao Xian and Tuo silent, Su Gu thought they did not understand what was going on, so he said, "You can cooperate with me and make a deal. Both sides will benefit." "We're poor," Xiao Xian said. "It's okay. I'm not poor." Su Gu waved his hand. "I'm unfamiliar with this place," Xiao Xian said. "It doesn't matter. I'm familiar with it." Su Gu smiled. "We only have 3 people," Xiao Xian said again. "The 3 of you must be very powerful people." Su Gu's smile was a bit stiff. He didn't know if he was answering Xiao Xian or convincing himself. Xiao Xian looked at Su Gu again and said, "Thank you for today. As for the cooperation, let's go back and discuss it first." "Only 3 people, and they still have to go back and discuss it?" The smile on Su Gu's face became more and more reluctant. "When will the discussion result come out?" "We'll reply tomorrow," Xiao Xian said. "Good." Xiao Xian and the other 2 did not immediately agree, but they also did not immediately refuse. With such a thought, Su Gu's mood was better. After the 2 sides separated, Tuo sighed, "This third young master seems to be different from other slave owners. If it were another slave owner, it would certainly not be so easy to talk to. In fact, it's not much worse. It's just that he was forced into a corner," Xiao Xian said. "A person who has not had an exclusive slave so far, nor has he cooperated with any tribe to trade, had no merits, and could not come up with anything to fight with his 2 brothers. He was almost removed from the list of candidates for the throne, and was just making a final struggle. Whether to cooperate or not, Xiao Xian really had to think carefully about it. The Yinjiao 3 people were indeed in a weak position here, and could not compare to the other tribes. The other 2 young masters may not necessarily look at them in the eye, and cooperation was very difficult. Even if they succeeded, they would not be taken seriously. Coming here, Xiao Xian did not really intend to hide. He wanted to know more information, and the other tribes were always hiding and guarding. In this way, cooperating with the local people was indeed a good thing. Su Gu was a waste? Perhaps, but to be able to live healthily until now, how could he be a real waste? When Xiao Xian returned to the broken house in the tribal area, the camel at the door was chewing hay. This hay was a kind of grass that grew in the city. It was as thick as a finger and had a long hollow stem. The camel seemed to like it very much. Xiao Xian stared at the small pile of hay there, thinking. The camel chewed on the hay and saw that Xiao Xian had been staring at its hay. It moved its body to block Xiao Xian's line of sight. Who knew that the next moment, Xiao Xian directly reached out and pulled out 2 from inside. "Ong, fart, take 2 and use them. Tomorrow, I'll pull some back for you." Recently, because of the lack of water, there were a lot of dead grass in some places in the city. Lei and Tuo saw Xiao Xian grab the camel's hay and bring it into the house. They thought that Xiao Xian wanted to chew it by himself. However, after Xiao Xian entered the house, he just picked up the hay and then closed his eyes. After a few breaths, Xiao Xian's fingers moved and began to tie a knot with the hay. Lei gave Tuo a look. "What is Xian doing?" Tuo shook his head. No matter what Xiao Xian did, they just had to wait. After a while, Xiao Xian opened his eyes and looked at the grass knot that had been formed in his hand. He could not help but frown. Seeing Xiao Xian's serious face, Tua asked, "Xian, what's wrong?" "Nothing, I intend to cooperate with Su Gu," Xiao Xian said. Lei opened his mouth, but still did not say a word against it. When they came out, the shaman and the chief said that the matter would be decided by Xiao Xian. The next day, early in the morning, Xiao Xian had not yet gone out when Su Gu came to find him. For the tribal area in the city, although he did not cooperate with any tribe, he still knew this place. He also knew where Xiao Xian and the other two lived. They did not expect Su Gu to personally come to their door. Lei and Tuo were also surprised. "What do you think?" Su Gu asked when he entered the door. Xiao Xian did not directly answer, but said, "You'd better avoid the water today." "Water? How long has it been since it rained? Where did the water come from? Did the water that he usually drank count? Wouldn't he die of thirst?" Hearing this, Su Gu felt that Xiao Xian was playing with him. His eyes flashed with hostility, but it quickly converged. He looked at Xiao Xian with a serious face and asked, "Why do you say that?" "After today, if you are still willing, we will cooperate." Xiao Xian did not care about the anger on Su Gu's face. "Good. You wait." Su Gu clenched his fists, feeling that he was condescending to this point. Xiao Xian and the other two really did not know how to appreciate favors. He also felt that this matter seemed to be a bit wrong. Seeing Xiao Xian like this, his heart felt strange. After thinking about it, he waved his hand and went out of the house. Thus, on this day, many people saw the three young masters of Luoya City rush into the tribal area and come out with a cold face. Chapter 298. After Xiao Xian saw Su Gu, he had the intention to cooperate with this person. He felt that this person was a bit strange, but he couldn't tell where it was. He always felt that this person's strength should not be limited to this. After returning to the tribal area, because he couldn't figure it out, he saw the camel chewing the hay happily. Xiao Xian then had the idea of divination. On the way here with the team, Xiao Xian also tried several divination, calculating the sandstorms and other weather changes in the desert. As for more distant or more complicated things, there were many times when he couldn't figure it out. The knots he made entangled his fingers. His ability was not enough. When he tied the knot, no one else saw it. The conclusion was also fed to the camel. Therefore, only Tuo and Lei knew that Xiao Xian tied the knot. This time, Xiao Xian just intended to try it. If the knot was successful, it would naturally be good. If it failed, it didn't matter. He just needed to choose the best choice at the moment. What he wanted to do was related to the third young master, and he really divined something. The conclusion only foreshadowed today's water, which was more dangerous. It just so happened that the third young master, who couldn't wait to make an alliance, took the initiative to come here. Xiao Xian told him. As for whether he listened or not, Xiao Xian couldn't control it. If the third young master couldn't withstand it, then there was no need for an alliance. On the other side, the third young master Su Gu, who left the tribal area with a straight face, had no intention of strolling around and went straight to the center of the city. The center of Luoya City was the place where the slave owners lived. Whether it was the slave owners with a very low sense of existence in the city, or the several hotly discussed young masters of Luoya City, they were all concentrated in the center of the city. However, the difference was that the king and the young masters could live in the highest palace, while the other slave owners could not set foot there without the king's permission. Otherwise, they would be killed without mercy. Talking about friendship with the king was courting death. As long as they were not too tired, they had to abide by the rules. As soon as they saw Su Gu's face, the slaves hurriedly got out of the way for fear of being angered. Su Gu. Su Gu, who was walking inside, was stopped. Hearing this voice, Su Gu frowned and impatiently looked over there. What's the matter? The female slave owner Suya, who was dressed in blue, with blue patterns on her face and various jewelry on her hands, slowly walked over. Behind her, there were two slaves holding fruits and water, following closely behind her. She was one of the two remaining royal sisters, and also the one who had caused trouble for Xiao Xian and the others yesterday. However, at this moment, she did not ask anyone to carry her. I've already done what I promised you. What about the thing? Suya raised his fingers, smeared with bluegrass juice, and reached out to Su Gu. She promised Su Gu to test the people of the Yanjiao tribe, but after returning yesterday, the gem that Su Gu promised was not delivered. This morning, she did not find anyone, so she personally came here to wait, just in time to stop Su Gu. I'll have someone send it to you later. Su Gu did not look at Suya again. After replying, he left. Looking at Su Gu's back, Suya squinted and sneered, just a waste, yet you still want to cross with me. If it were not for those beautiful gems, she would be too lazy to pay attention to Su Gu. A person who did not even have an exclusive slave would sooner or later be driven out of the palace. Her line of sight was withdrawn from the high steps. Suya took the two slaves with her and left. She just came to collect the debt and did not care about other things. Su Gu walked up the steps. Before entering the palace, he turned around to look. Standing on the high palace platform of the royal city, many places in the city could be seen. This feeling of looking down on everything was what every slave owner hoped for. Did he want to be a king? Naturally, he wanted to. If the other two brothers inherited the throne, Su Gu's own end could be imagined. It was not so cruel before, but since the success of the current Luoya City King's counterattack, it gave the slave owners a lesson and opened a new door for those ambitious slave owners. And when they stood at the peak, everyone who was a threat to them would be cut down, leaving no chance for them to turn the tables. Thinking of his own ability, Su Gu clenched his fists. In the past, his father, Luoya City King Su Luan, gave the several young masters the same resources. However, from this year onwards, there was a deviation. Su Gu got a lot less resources. For Su Gu, this was not a good thing. Walking to his residence, Su Gu took a few mouthfuls of water from the colored pottery cup handed over by the slave. Putting down the cup, Su Gu looked at the slaves around him. These were the resources given by his father. None of them were his own. In recent years, his two brothers had more and more slaves around them. In addition to the ones given by his father, the two brothers also had some slaves that belonged to them. Looking at Su Gu's place, it was still the same. No, it was less. Those slaves died for various reasons. Because he was not capable enough, he could not have his own exclusive slaves. As soon as he saw these slaves, Su Gu's chest tightened. He waved his hand to signal these slaves to get out of the way and not be an eyesore. After sitting down, Su Gu recalled today's events. He thought of the Yanjiao tribe's words called Xiao Xian. Just as he was about to continue drinking water, Su Gu's eyes drooped, looking at the water in the cup. Drinking was not right, not drinking was also not right. He was thirsty, but Xiao Xian's words were like a thorn, stabbing him when he saw the water. Really, very angry. Snap! Throwing the cup on the ground, Su Gu glanced at the splashed water stains on the ground. He thought, the people of the Flaming Horns tribe must be fooling me. They must think that I'm a waste and there's no need for cooperation. So, they fabricated such a sentence to fool me? Su Gu wanted to put Xiao Xian's words behind his head, but every time he could not achieve it. He was also afraid of death. Xiao Xian's words, the more he thought about it, the more he felt cold. Tribesman, Wu Shi. Su Gu suddenly said. A figure, like a ghost, silently appeared in front of Su Gu. He bowed his head with respect, but was not as humble as the other slaves. Among the resources provided by the Luoya City King to his several sons, in addition to the servant slaves and the Tai slaves, there were also two higher-level, staff-level, slaves. However, One of them, in order to protect Su Gu when he went out of the city, was dragged under the sand by a beast in the desert and died. Now, only this staff-level slave called Wuxia was left. Third young master. Wuxia said. Wuxia, I know you have some understanding of the tribesmen. You say, can the tribesmen really predict good or bad luck? Su Gu asked. Wuxia thought for a moment and replied, I heard that the tribesmen have witches, and witches may indeed have that ability. Hearing this, Su Gu's face relaxed a little. There really was such an ability. Wuxia's words were not finished as he continued, but the tribesmen generally do not let their witches leave the tribe too far. Even if they leave, there will be layers of protection. The bigger the tribe, the tighter the protection. In many tribes, the status of the witches is only second to their leader. Su Gu's face changed. He thought that there were only 3 young people from the Yanjiao tribe. Naturally, it was impossible for them to have witches. It looked like they were just ordinary warriors and not witches. That is to say, they are really lying to me. Almost every word was squeezed out from between his teeth. Su Gu was so angry that he stomped his feet. The pottery on the table was all overturned. The other slaves around him could not wait to shrink into an egg and did not dare to immediately come forward to clean up. Although they were slaves thrown by the king, now that they were here with the young master, they still had to look at the young master's face. Otherwise, they would be slaughtered by the young master. Moreover, their level was not as good as Wuxia. At this time, they could only shrink. Su Gu smashed the things in the house. His anger subsided a little. He felt that the house was too stuffy and planned to go out for a walk. Out of the door, Su Gu did not know why, but he remembered Xiao Xian's words. He stood at the door and paced back and forth a few times. After 2 steps, he turned back and shouted, Wuxia. Still don't follow me. Wuxia's eyes flashed with surprise. This young master was usually very annoyed with slaves following him. Unless he went out of the city, as long as he was in the city, he would not bring a slave with him. He probably felt that it was not good to bring other people's slaves with him. But now, he let him follow. No matter what he thought in his heart, Wuxia still followed. Probably also felt that his style was inconsistent with his usual. Su Gu's face changed a few times. He turned around and walked away quickly. The king's palace on the high platform was mostly not made of stone, but wood. It was the famous sunset tree in Luoya City that was rumored to be immortal for 1,000 years. In Luoya City, only the slave owners could use the sunset tree to build houses. Other slaves did not have this qualification. The main material to build the palace was the carefully selected sunset tree. The palace had the smell of the sunset tree. Su Gu looked in front of him. There was a small pool, where his father raised a turtle. Pool. Water. Around. Several slaves came out of the wine cellar with a few sharp-bottom wine jars. Wine. There was water. Avoid it again. A group of slaves carried a large wooden box from outside the palace. The wooden box was made of sunset tree and belonged to the slave owners of the Luoya royal city. Seeing this wooden box, Su Gu knew that their water source had come. In addition to owning the city, the Luoya city king also owned a small oasis. The water they drank was transported from the oasis. Although there were several deep wells in the city, the water inside was very turbid. Moreover, if one drank the turbid water from the wells for a long time, the skin would easily dry up and crack. This was one of the reasons why most of the slaves in the city had dry cracks on their skin. Most of the slave owners were a group of people who enjoyed life. They had higher requirements in terms of material life. Therefore, every once in a while, the Luoya city king would let people bring water from a distant oasis for the slave owners to enjoy. Therefore, after seeing the big wooden box, Su Gu did not intend to pay much attention to it at first. But thinking that it was also related to water, he moved his feet and turned to the side. Wuxia, who was behind Su Gu, saw this and was very puzzled. He pondered. Today, the third young master's brain was filled with sand again? Why was he acting so strange? However, thinking that his usual behavior was not normal, Wuxia did not think much about it. All he did was follow the young master. Chapter 299. Not far away, there was a door where the wooden box carrying water would be put down. The guarding slaves would take out the pots full of water and then put them in the place where the water was stored, waiting for the slave owners to enjoy them. Su Gu's line of sight swept over there. He did not feel that it was inappropriate, but he felt that his behavior was a bit cowardly. He was quite ashamed, but the thorn in his heart stabbed again, so he chose to avoid that side and detour. If there was no accident afterwards, the three people from Yanjiao, you just wait. Su Gu's heart cursed. Wuxia, who was behind Su Gu, did not know what the young master was thinking at the moment and just slowly followed. Walking and walking, Wuxia's heart suddenly raised a chill, and the hair on the back of his neck instantly stood up. Young master. Su Gu was walking when he heard Wuxia's shout. Then, he was picked up. All he saw was the fast-retreating scenery. Boom! The big wooden box that was originally being carried exploded. The flying splashes and pottery shards whistled past Su Gu's ears, hitting the surrounding wooden walls, making a pop sound, just like a dense arrow flying. With the explosion of the wooden box, the splashes and pottery scattered, and three figures rushed out from inside. The man, who was originally like a flattened tree bark, had doubled in size when he rushed out. They were different from ordinary slaves. There were no slave marks related to the slave owners on their bodies, and there were no words tattooed on their faces. These slaves were specially trained for assassinations. Just like the death warriors, they had no intention of leaving once they arrived. They had their eyes fixed on the target. Their purpose should be to rush into the interior of the palace and assassinate the city's largest slave owner, Luoya City King Su Luan. The surrounding slaves shouted, as well as the beast-like roars of the assassins. From calm to austere, the air was full of suffocating killing intent. In an instant, the blood overflowed. Su Gu was carried to a place far away from the battlefield. He caught a glimpse of a red and white liquid spurting from not far away, along with the sound of broken bones and an abrupt scream. Bang! Shortly after Su Gu left, several figures were hit by a violent force. They slammed into the wooden wall and instantly penetrated the wooden wall that Su Gu had just passed through. The people who were hit through the wall fell to the ground. Their bodies were distorted and badly mutilated. It was unknown whether they were dead or alive. These were the slaves who guarded the palace in Luoya City. The trunk of the sunset tree was much sturdier than that of ordinary trees. The older it was, the sturdier it became. The slave owners in the city sometimes used sunset trees to make spears, arrows, and so on. The tribesmen who came and went, especially those who liked to use arrows, would take out a lot of things to exchange for sunset trees. Many of the wood used in the palace were sunset trees that were more than 100 years old. Those hard wooden walls, even if not as good as stone walls, were enough to block the general slaves. However, at this time, Su Gu only heard the sound of the walls being broken. The trees that were usually called the hardest in the desert were so vulnerable at this time. Wuxia carried Su Gu and gradually left the battlefield. There were still sounds of fighting and killing. At the edge of the palace, Wuxia stopped to rest. There were many wounds on his back, but fortunately, they were not fatal. He had also escaped quickly, so the danger had passed for the time being. However, if he had been a little closer to that side, he might not have had time to escape. It was lucky, otherwise, he would follow in the footsteps of the former servant. Wuxia thought. Looking at the young master who was brought here, Wuxia found that the young master's state was somewhat wrong. His eyes were only staring ahead, unfocused. He did not know what he was thinking. Was he scared silly? Although this time it was indeed dangerous, this kind of assassination happened every year. As a competitor for the king, his courage should not be so small. young master? Wuxia probed. Su Gu did not answer. Third young master? Wuxia increased his volume. Su Gu still did not greet him. Third young master, are you okay? Wuxia reached out and poked him. Su Gu, who was immersed in his thoughts, almost jumped up in shock. Third young master, are you okay? Wuxia asked again. No. No. Nothing. Su Gu's voice trembled a little. Was he really scared? Wuxia thought. Ignoring Wuxia, Su Gu carefully listened to the movement over there. After the other side slowly calmed down, Su Gu said, let's go and see. Distinguishing the sound over there, Wuxia knew that it was temporarily handled, but he did not know if there were other unknown assassins. However, at this time, the young master said that he wanted to go, and he could not stop him. He could only protect him and go there. Around the broken wooden walls, the red blood was very conspicuous. The dead slaves were being dragged away. In the collapsed places, there were also slaves cleaning up. Su Gu saw a person who fell to the ground. That person was not a slave of Luoya City, but an assassin. He signaled Wuxia to remove the sawdust covering the top. Su Gu carefully looked at the dead assassin. The assassin had many injuries on his body, and all of them were pierced by sharp weapons. However, even with such injuries, he persisted for a period of time. His vitality was much stronger than the average slave. On their hands, the black raised finger bones seemed to be a sharp blade dipped in poison, shining with a cold light. There were no special signs on their bodies, so they could not see which city they were from. These people usually hid very well, making it difficult to detect their breath. Otherwise, they would not have been carried all the way from the oasis to here. These were specially trained slaves for assassination. These slaves were carefully trained from childhood until they were sent on a task. Their entire lives were dedicated to an assassination. Such slaves were extremely dangerous, and also a sharp butcher knife in the hands of the big slave owners. The competition between the big slave owners, in addition to a few open desert battles from time to time, there was also a steady stream of assassinations. Su Gu knew that his father's men also had them, but no one had ever seen them, including Su Gu himself and his two other brothers. Third young master? A servant came over. He was ordered by the king to clean up the post-war affairs, but why was the third young master standing here? Su Gu withdrew his sight from the slave and waved his hand, indicating the slaves who came to clean up the battlefield to continue. After listening to the slaves who cleaned up the battlefield, he turned and left. 23 slaves, 9 assistant slaves, 14 servant slaves, and 12 people who carried the wooden box in were all dead. 10 of the 15 slaves who were guarding at the door were dead. The slaves who rushed over were either dead or injured. With such injuries, it was estimated that they would die soon. The death toll would eventually exceed 30, or even 40. If there was no detour at that time, but directly passed through there, would he also be on the death list? Su Gu recalled the words of the Yanjiao tribe's man named Xiao Xian. By chance? Or had he already received the news? The more he thought about it, the more confused he became. He could not stand still. Originally, Su Gu went to the place where he lived, but now he directly turned and ran toward the palace exit. Wuxia, who was behind him, saw the young master suddenly turn and run. After thinking about it, he continued to follow. Therefore, on that day, the slaves of Luoya City saw the third young master rush into the tribal area in the morning. After he came out with a cold face, they saw him rush in again. Chapter 300. Xiao Xian was in the house, burying his head in writing. He wrote down in detail the set of language used by the slave owners that he had learned during this time. Every time he had his own experience, he would also record it. Tuo and Lei were also forced by Xiao Xian to learn these languages. Even if they could not fully learn, it was always good to understand some of them, so that they would not be deceived by the slaves and the slave owners. In the slave owner's territory, it would be easier to understand more, and the later actions would be easier. The so-called sharpening the knife would not delay the work of cutting firewood. They now had food on hand, so they were not in a hurry to do other things. First, they had to understand the most basic things. When Su Gu came over, Lei and Tuo were dizzy from looking at those complicated words. It was rare for them to take a break with Su Gu's arrival. Xiao Xian looked up at Su Gu, who rushed in. He stopped writing, rolled up the animal skin roll full of words and put it away. "What's the matter?" Xiao Xian asked as he packed up. Su Gu, who rushed into the house, gasped for breath. He took 2 steps towards Xiao Xian, and slapped his palm on the table. "I asked you," bang. The table, which was not very sturdy to begin with, could not withstand the force and scattered into sand all over the floor. Seeing Xiao Xian and the other 2 staring at him, Su Gu waved his hand. "I'll wait for someone to redo it for you." Looking around, there was no place to sit, so Su Gu simply stood. "I have something to ask you." Su Gu looked at Xiao Xian. "Are you a witch?" "Witch?" Lei and Tuo were somewhat confused. How could Xiao Xian be a witch? Besides, it was impossible for a witch to come to such a place. "No," Xiao Xian said. "But you said this morning." The expression on Su Gu's face changed a few times. What happened in the palace was not good to spread. However, thinking that Xiao Xian's hint could actually match up with today's matter, Su Gu took a deep breath. His eager appearance was gone, and he calmed down. He stared straight at Xiao Xian and said in a deep voice, "Did you already know something?" "This is our first time here, so we don't know much about this place," Xiao Xian said. Su Gu was silent for a while and did not address this issue again. Whether Xiao Xian already knew about the news, or he really had the ability to predict, he really wanted to cooperate with Yanjiao's people now. Moreover, he had no way out. So what if he fought? "About the cooperation, what do you think?" Su Gu asked. "We can work together, but before that, I want to know what benefits we can get," Xiao Xian asked. Su Gu stood up and straightened his back. As a slave owner, he could provide too much, so he still had this confidence. "I can let the slaves build you a bigger house, give you passage tokens, and provide food and water," Su Gu said. Xiao Xian nodded. These 3 things were really good, but they were not what he wanted most. "I want to know something about the other slave owners." Su Gu frowned. "Yes. I can give you all the information I know, but you must come up with something worth exchanging. This is natural. So, happy cooperation?" "Happy cooperation." There was no contract. In the cooperation between the slave owners and the tribes, under normal circumstances, they would not sign a fixed contract, unless it involved some important things or when the 2 sides were very familiar with each other. Only then would they make other plans. After solving the matter that had been on his mind, Su Gu's mood was better. As a reward for Xiao Xian's tip in the morning, after he left the tribal area, he had people send some stones for building houses. These stones were cut and transported from the rocky areas in the desert, with special slaves guarding them. Xiao Xian could not go there at will. Su Gu's actions provided a lot of convenience for Xiao Xian. They only needed to wait in the house for the stones to be transported. Xiao Xian took a fancy to an open space in the tribal area and asked the other tribes. After learning that no one was building a house there, he took Tuo and Lei to build a house together. The slaves sent by Su Gu also helped. 2 days later, another big house was built in the tribal area, which was not worse than the other tribes. The difference was that the other tribes had dozens of people living in each embassy, while Yanjiao's embassy only had 3 people. In order to show his importance and sincerity, Su Gu specially cut a piece of sunset tree to make a wooden sign and hung it at the door of Yanjiao's embassy. He also wrote it with golden paint, but it was moved aside by Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian polished a slate himself and hung it at the door. He engraved the words Yanjiao in the tribal language, and also engraved a totem at the corner of the eyes on the slate. Su Gu's wooden board was in the common language of the slave owners. 2 languages, 2 signs, were hung at the door. Xiao Xian's slate was at the front door, while Su Gu's board was a little more to the side. This is called an embassy. Xiao Xian looked at the built house and said. Although such a building was not very gorgeous in Xiao Xian's view, as long as it was similar to the other tribes, there was no need to be too prominent. If more people came in the future, they would have a firm foothold and strong strength, then it would be no harm to expand. For now, it was better not to be too high profile. Before, because there was no place, the 3 people crowded in a broken stone house. Now that there was a new embassy, they were separated. Each person occupied a large room, while the camel was tied in the backyard. Xiao Xian also specially built a shed for it. For the changes in Yanjiao, the other people in the tribal area were clear. This was the cooperation between Yanjiao and the 3rd young master of Luoya City. Really, what were they thinking? It was not good to cooperate with others, but they chose to cooperate with this one. Even if they were looking for the 2 royal sisters, this 3rd young master was a person who did not even have an exclusive slave. She of the Hui tribe also sighed when he talked to people. He told the kid that if he wanted to cooperate, he should look for the other 2 young masters, not this one. Why didn't he listen to his advice? What a pity. Sure enough, it was the first time a young man came here. He was thoughtless, impulsive, and short-sighted. Regardless of what other people thought, Xiao Xian and the other 2 were still quite satisfied with this cooperation. The day after the house was built, Su Gu came again to find Xiao Xian. This time, the 2 only met alone in Xiao Xian's room. Lei and Tuo were not there, and Su Gu did not bring Wuxia. Here, you want the pass token. Su Gu handed the token to Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian took the token, which was made of sunset trees. On it was written Yanjiao in the words used by the slave owners, and on the other side was the symbol of Luoya City. Putting away the pass token, Xiao Xian looked at Su Gu. The 3rd young master looked like he wanted to say something but hesitated. He seemed to be entangled with something. What's the matter? Say it. Xiao Xian said. Su Gu irritably scratched his head. These days, in addition to helping Xiao Xian get the pass token, he also specifically asked people about the tribal shaman. The more he thought about it, the more complicated his heart became. After a long time, Su Gu squeezed out a sentence. Are you really not a shaman? No, if you know about the tribe, you know that the tribe's shaman will not come out easily. Xiao Xian said. Are you the heir of the shaman? Su Gu asked again. No. Xiao Xian affirmed. If you are not, then how did you predict water? Su Gu was not reconciled. Being able to predict does not necessarily mean being a shaman. Su Gu heard this and sat on the stone bench, looking disheartened. Xiao Xian thought for a moment and asked, In your city, there is no shaman? Many cities have no shaman. Su Gu said, As far as I know, there are no more than 3 cities with shamans. And there are more than 20 cities in the desert. For the slave owners, a shaman was not necessary. A city only needed 1 master. The power of your tribe comes from the fire seed, and our power exists in our blood. Su Gu held out his hand. Xiao Xian saw that on Su Gu's hand, there was a blue flame gradually emerging. What surprised Xiao Xian even more was that when Su Gu made these blue flames, in his mind, inside the eggshell, a flame suddenly appeared at the edge. It was not big, but it was very obvious. Seeing this flame at first sight, Xiao Xian's heart jumped to 2 words, fire seed. However, this was somewhat different from the tribe's fire seed. Xiao Xian suddenly thought that the slave owners did not need a fire seed. Was it because the power of the fire seed did not exist in the outside world, but in their bodies? In his mind, inside the eggshell, the flames suddenly appeared. The red flame and the blue flame intertwined, seeming somewhat chaotic. Su Gu looked at the blue flame on his hand and said, "A successful slave owner must have the ability to enslave people. This kind of slavery does not refer to the ordinary slave, but to turn an unrelated person into a slave that belongs to oneself. The stronger this ability to enslave people, the more slaves the slave owner can have. As the king of a city, the slave owner's ability to enslave people was the highest, and there were many slaves under his hands. Of course, other slave owners, even if they could enslave more slaves, could not cross the king of a city, or they would be regarded as having ulterior motives. In addition to the slave owners, other slave owners could more or less have some of their own slaves. However, in Luoya City, Su Gu was the only slave owner who had not been able to have his own slaves so far. He was a failure in the eyes of the slave owners, a waste. Su Gu did not say how they enslave people, but Xiao Xian speculated based on Su Gu's words that the slave owner's ability to enslave people seemed to be similar to their engraved ferocious beasts, but more overbearing. The blue flame on Su Gu's hand also made Xiao Xian think of the time when he used the engraving secret technique to engrave Caesar. Su Gu had been staring at the blue flame on his hand. He did not know what he was thinking of, but he was lost in thought. Xiao Xian was also studying the flame that appeared in the eggshell, in his mind. The red and blue interlaced flame, compared to before, had a weaker sense of disorder. The separated and scattered blue flame was slowly gathering. "Oh, forget it. You don't understand. You tribesmen don't have to worry about this at all." Su Gu put away the flame on his hand, and in Xiao Xian's mind, the strange flame gradually disappeared. With regret, Su Gu left the tribal area and returned to the palace. After the meal, he closed himself in the room and began the daily necessary enslavement practice. He did not know if it was an illusion, but Su Gu felt that when he used his enslavement ability today, it was a lot smoother. Although it still did not reach the standard of enslavement, compared to yesterday, there was progress. Chapter 301. As a waste in people's eyes, Su Gu had not given up. He was clear about his situation and analyzed the possible results if he continued to fail like this. Some people advised him to show weakness now and then show goodwill to his two brothers. However, Su Gu was clear about the temperament of his two brothers. No matter who became the king of Luoya City in the end, even if Su Gu's life was kept, Su Gu would not live well. Instead of that, it was better to fight. A slave owner without ambition was not a good slave owner. Because of this decision, Su Gu would practice in his room every day when others did not know. However, failure again and again made Su Gu's confidence less and less. The number of times he tried was too many. Su Gu was very clear about every change in himself. After feeling the difference today, when he practiced enslavement again, he carefully observed it. Then, he was pleasantly surprised to find that the enslavement power was much smoother than usual and not as strenuous as before. Why did such a change happen? After the surprise, Su Gu began to carefully analyze it. He had also thought that it was the result of his daily practice, but he had never seen such an obvious change even when he had been practicing so diligently. These few days, due to various things, he had less time to practice than usual, but the result was incomparably shocking. Why? Why in the world? Su Gu took out the things he did in the past 2 days and analyzed it bit by bit. The movement of his fingers suddenly stopped. His pupils shrank as he thought of a possibility. Xiao Xian in Yanjiao. The person who had a witch-like prediction ability. Yes, it seemed that it was at that time that the change happened. Before, because of his heavy thoughts, he did not pay attention. Now that he thought about it, at that time, there was indeed a strange feeling. It was as if a ladle of muddy water mixed with sand was filtered by a densely woven linen cloth. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that it was so. Su Gu walked back and forth in the room, jumping, clenching his fists and raising them. He took a few deep breaths to calm down his excited mood. In order to be sure, Su Gu ran to the wanderer area again that day. In the evening, Xiao Xian looked at the energetic and high-spirited third young master, practicing the enslavement method in front of him. Since there was not enough firewood here, it was inconvenient to start a fire. Xiao Xian took out a water moon stone to light up the place. Looking at the little slave owner who was practicing, Xiao Xian did not chase him away. Instead, he observed the changes in the flame in his mind again. He guessed that because of the eggshell in his mind, Su Gu had some favorable changes. Su Gu wanted to gain benefits from this place, while Xiao Xian himself also wanted to study the source of the slave owner's power. Su Gu was just the right experimental subject. Amidst the intertwining red and blue flames, the sense of chaos became weaker and weaker. The blue and red flames converged and became distinct. When Su Gu used the enslavement method, the blue flame that appeared on his hand became more and more stable. It was not like before, where it seemed to be blown away by the wind. Ray, who lived in the opposite room, looked at the moon outside the window and then looked at the light coming from Xiao Xian's room. He thought to himself, why is the third young master here instead of sleeping so late at night? Was there something wrong with his brain? Su Gu stayed with Xiao Xian until dawn the next day. In the morning, the tribesmen who got up early talked about the cooperation between the three Yanjiao people and the waste of the third young master. As they were talking, they saw the Yanjiao side's door open, and the Luoya city's third young master, who they were just talking about, walked out quickly with a straight face, as if something had made him very angry. After Su Gu left, the tribesmen who gathered together to chat were in disbelief. That was Su Gu, the Luoya city's third young master. It seems so. What seems so? That's Su Gu. How could Su Gu come out from Yanjiao? Could it be that he came here before dawn? I heard that Su Gu came last night. He didn't leave until now? Even if the tribesmen cooperated with the slave owners, there had never been a slave owner who stayed overnight in the tribe's place. Seeing this, they couldn't help but think. Looking at Su Gu's face, did he quarrel with the Yanjiao people? It's estimated that they didn't reach an agreement. It's very likely. In their view, whether it was Su Gu or the three Yanjiao people, they were unreliable. It was certain that they would get together to quarrel. On the other side, Su Gu tried to maintain a tight face, not letting people see the excitement in his heart. He held back his laughter until the blue veins came out, and his face looked a bit scary. It was not that he didn't want to laugh. If he came out of Yanjiao with a happy face, people would certainly guess what benefits he got from Yanjiao. Xiao Xian's ability could not be known to others. If it was known by his two brothers, it was estimated that they would dig him out from here. Su Gu had never been so fortunate to cooperate with Yanjiao. At first, when Su Gu decided to cooperate with the Yanjiao people, his heart didn't take them too seriously. Even if it was not a Yanjiao tribe, as long as it was a tribe, he would treat it with the same attitude. But now, Su Gu's view of the Yanjiao people had completely changed. Whether it was Xiao Xian's words or his own changes, he must pay attention to them. This transaction was really worth it. Thinking of Xiao Xian's request, Su Gu also began to prepare. The Yanjiao people wanted to know more about the slave owners, so he had to quickly prepare these. Otherwise, this ally would be gone. Returning to the palace from the tribal area, Su Gu saw that the slaves were moving out a lot of sharp-bottomed pottery filled with fruit wine from the wine cellar. Today, there was fruit wine to drink. Su Gu's mood was better, and he couldn't help but smile. Now, he finally laughed. Well, when the time came, he could have someone send a jar to Yanjiao. He was in a good mood. Even to the slaves, Su Gu rarely showed a smile. When the slaves holding the wine jars saw Su Gu smile, they almost shook and dropped the wine jars. This was the third young master. The third young master could smile so kindly and not hypocritically. Was he still not awake? Su Gu did not look at the wine slave who was there, and went straight to his residence. When he passed through the pool and the palace, he was in a good mood to stop and enjoy it. In the desert, it was extravagant to build such a pool for growing flowers and raising turtles. Only the king's palace could have such a view. Su Gu did not know the flowers that grew in the water. He saw a turtle crawling out of the water, lying on the edge of the pool, half of its body exposed outside. The turtles in the pool were brought back from other places by Su Gu's father. He thought that they could not be raised. Who knew that a lot of them survived, but they were not active. Every day, they were listless. Poking them with a straw pole, they rarely responded. The color of their bodies also became lighter. He didn't know what was going on. Where there were flowers and pools, the air seemed particularly fresh and moist. Su Gu sat on the edge of the pool, looking at the turtle. He quickly poked it with his finger, but the turtle did not move. He poked again. It still did not move. Su Gu did not care about it. Looking around, he saw that a group of patrolling slaves had just passed by and left. There was no one else around. Su Gu thought of the results of his night. He could not help but reach out and mobilize the power in his body. Soon, a blue flame appeared in his palm. The flame was so stable that its shape could be seen clearly. Feeling the smooth feeling of this process, Su Gu's mood was refreshed like cold water on a hot day. Perhaps, it would not be long before he could enslave people and get a real slave that belonged to him. Looking at the flame in his palm, Su Gu's eyes caught a glimpse of the turtle that was slowly moving. Like a ghost, he stretched his hand over there. The moment he touched the turtle's back, the blue flame followed Su Gu's palm and spread to the turtle's body. With the spread of the flame, black stripes appeared on the turtle's back. Su Gu felt a force passing along his arm to the turtle. After a few breaths, Su Gu felt the energy in his body stabilize again, and the flame in his palm disappeared. A sense of exhaustion hit him. Su Gu rubbed his forehead, feeling something. His eyes stared at the turtle lying on the edge of the pool. The expression on his face changed from disbelief, to confusion, to surprise, and then to anger. The rapid change of expression made the muscles on his face twitch. His enslavement was successful. This was worth celebrating, worth being happy. But Su Gu really did not want to be the first slave owner in history to enslave a turtle for the first time. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.